Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had God's Immortal Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. When Izuku was younger, he never understood why people thought that "may you live in interesting times" was a curse. Even less so now, because he's sure he'd go crazy if the world is as boring as they prayed for it to be. Well, the people who told him that are long dead, and Izuku really couldn't be bothered to remember anything anymore. Actually, it's more like he can't, but that shouldn't be relevant, if at all. Izuku doesn't know how much longer he'll be trapped in the box not passage of youth. It's such a strange phenomenon because his body just doesn't change. At all. He's been stuck at 16 years old for God knows how long. He doesn't even remember his birth date. Or birth year. He only remembers that he's had a family and their name was Midoriya. Was Midoriya, because they're gone. Izuku watched faces narrow, stubble appear, names no longer adorning a person but rather the stone slabs they're buried under. When he was only 26, he could still make excuses, or rather, let the excuses fill themselves, because people couldn't think of a better reason for that green-haired man to look like a child. He doesn't even have to say much to change it, and he finds it tedious. He's no longer a part of that family because they died some 40 years ago. Slowly but surely, the world moves forward, carrying with it the people he once knew and the silent whispers of his mother. He doesn't remember if he's had a father and doesn't want to, because longing is not for people like him. If there's anyone else like him, he's pretty sure that he's the only one. Though it's very much possible, because they would probably go into hiding just like him. He just has a feeling that it's not. The world moves forward without him. It stings a little more than it should, but at the same time, Izuku thinks that he should get used to this. Since he's immortal and all, you know. He really wants to tell someone, to just relent, but he's lived too long and seen so much until there is nothing else to see and nothing sacred to obtain, and he knows that humans are fickle, and to seal one's words they must first be in a morgue. So Izuku can't and will never be able to tell someone, anyone, about this. Izuku repeats it like a mantra when it gets too bad, when he's so constipated and just longs to say anything, just to talk to someone, anyone about it, and he's too scared of the consequences and he will probably regret it. He would waste all those years that he'd spent, carefully crafting identities for Midoriya Izuku and others he couldn't even bother to make names for. He's a coward, but that's okay. People often say that time heals even if it is the thing that kills them. Good thing that it bends even before him, so no matter how much longer it'll take, he'll let the coarse river of time sand the roughened edges. Of what, he's not sure, but it's a cool metaphor. Semantics. Izuku attempts to jump off a few skyscrapers at night when nobody's watching, but he always got up just minutes after. It's thrilling, though, watching himself die. He collects some stray brain matter from the ground and puts them into a bag and sprays disinfectant on the ground to get rid of the red. It's not like they have his DNA anyways. Dying should really feel more painful than this, but Izuku mostly does it for kicks. It probably shouldn't be as fun, as references from the philosophical articles that he's read from people who survived an almost death predicament. But Izuku doesn't think it's that painful. He's never felt much pain anyway. Maybe it's the adrenaline. But all fun things in life comes to an end, as Izuku's quickly learned. Because he was put on suicide watch for a few weeks after one of his attempts was witnessed by a member of the force. But that's okay because even the mimicry of death is starting to lose its meaning, now. Izuku finds out that he could sleep for weeks at a time. Months even. Though with technology progressing, he can never find a good place to nap for a good few years or something. Though he quickly realizes that it's not as good of a plan to sleep for millennia at a time because he'll either wake up 6 feet under or screaming his mother's long-forgotten name. He doesn't get nightmares and he considers his memory worse than most of his actual age. The long-term memories that are engraved into his years would only repeat as blurry fragments in his nights. At least, that's what his doctor tells him. He also told Izuku that it's a medical miracle that Izuku still completely retained the body of a child, brain functions and frontal cortex, and all. And the fact that he's functionally a teenager at best. Izuku tells him that it's bullshit and he got banned from that hospital. Petty assholes. Eventually, the lines blur out and tangle with each other. Years pass, again, and Izuku watches the world silently and develops a, frankly unhealthy, morbid fascination with death. He's pretty sure he hasn't killed anyone yet, but maybe he will one day. So he settles down in an unremarkable part of the town, far and far and far away from his birthplace, buys an unremarkable apartment, and works in an unremarkable office. He buys makeup and disguises, organizes funerals and documents at the right time before people could realize that their upstairs teenage neighbor has been alive for decades. Until everything starts to become blurry again and the only form of his entertainment comes from the boring FING news. So then Izuku picks up a few university major courses in human medicine and biology, in hopes of learning just what went wrong with his genes. He almost forgot what schools are like, but university lecture halls are just as what he's remembered then. Or did he even remember? Is he just projecting? Come to think of it, he originally studied programming. Or advanced physics, or something. To which degree? Where were his diplomas again? And now he finds himself in a biochemistry class. This is probably a master's degree. Should he get a PhD? It'll be cool to be referred to as a doctor. Out of my FING way, punk, a Pomeranian says. Wait, not a Pomeranian. It's a human, but his hair is spiky and ash blonde, so it wasn't Izuku's fault that he mistook him for one anyway. Izuku takes a swig of his scalding black coffee and doesn't choke, much to the Pomeranian boy's chagrin. He doesn't know that Izuku can't get burned, so it's only fair. Did you FING hear me? Ooh. A potty mouth. Izuku is suddenly getting pulled to his feet. Well, he said that out loud, didn't he? And then he curses at the fact that he stopped growing in his teen years because the Pomeranian guy is really tall, and Izuku probably just looks like a thin noodle. Izuku tries to roll his eyes because they're attracting a commotion despite being early to the hall. Ha! You a FING brat or some? The F, are you doing in a university? The Pomeranian guy says. You kiss your mother with that mouth, Izuku says, instead of a reply, but quickly changes his mind afterward because he doesn't really want to get throttled to death in front of dozens of people and potentially get his secret leaked out to the world and get sent for experiments and whatever Inhuman Unit 731 sheet they want to pull on him and oh, yeah, I'm just baby-faced. I'm Midoriya Izuku by the way, who are you? Izuku internally applauds his courage because the lecture hall is silent. But he's gone through worse mortifying experiences than this and he got through. And he's dozens of decades years old so it's okay. The taller blonde snorts and lets him drop back to his seat. Bakugo Karuto. And then Karuto sits down a few seats next to him, probably because there aren't many people who like to torture themselves with biochemistry these days. Karuto seems like the type who cares for his friends aggressively. Izuku's never met someone like that before, not even in his long life. And he's really, really bored. So why not befriend Karuto? And then they became university buddies and F'd around a lot. Normally, these kinds of stories end just like that, because there's no more story plot for the immortal character and the mortal character will just die eventually, leaving the immortal to mourn him. Except things go FING wrong and Izuku would never mourn. Izuku remembered an old myth, a folktale, about a boy named Icarus. The boy flew too close to the sun and burnt out his wax and feather wings. How fitting, he taunts, Karuto was always golden and shining, a ball of fiery plasma, bigger than life but still cowered before death. People mourned for Icarus, but Izuku mourned his wings and his sun. Oh, wait, that's a moot point. He did mourn. Just not for people. Never for people, because they are never constant. At least most of the trees in the forests are still there when he goes to visit. He could seek salvation in turtles but even they have an end, and they can't really talk and are kind of slimy but it's okay. But there's bound to be a day when everything goes to shit. It's just that he thought he was prepared for it. A glowing baby was born in the city of Qing Qing, China. Along with several other cases of meta-abilities. When Karuto brings the topic up to him excitedly the next day and even showed him an article on their DNA analyses, Izuku wants to cry. In fear or relief, he doesn't know. They're in their last year of biochemistry, and it's October. They would both get their doctorates by next year if they finish their credits early. Oi, fucker. You always look like a brat, even after the last few years. Do you think it's because of those meta-abilities they were talking about lately? Karuto probably meant it as a joke, but Izuku froze. That can't be, he reasoned to Karuto, because then I'd be the first person to get an ability, ever. The moment the words came out of his mouth, Karuto barked out a laugh, and Izuku is suddenly hit with a realization. He laughs along anyways. He laughs some more after that. Izuku studied the cases and mutations of the people with meta-abilities. He realized that there's a specific part in their brain that stores an extra part of the DNA, called the plus alpha, or meta-ability factor. Izuku pulled a few favors to get to a DNA testing lab. He doesn't even know why he's doing it, but he goes anyway. The results are back, and Izuku has a plus alpha gene in his DNA. The rest of the year passes smoothly, just that the meta-ability users are appearing more and more. And just his luck, Izuku got hit by Karuto's motorcycle one day and survived. When Karuto tried to check him for injuries, he found only faint lines of scars. That should have been the end of it, but he also saw the scars closing in on themselves. Japan's government hates meta-ability users and it is currently a death punishment. Izuku had just exposed to him that he's practically immortal or has an extremely efficient regeneration ability. Oh, Karuto says when they get back to his apartment. It's squeaky clean despite Karuto's gangster personality. Izuku forgot to bring disinfectant with him that day, so he asks for a mop to clean the bloodstains with. Karuto waves him off and says it's okay, and that's when Izuku realized that he's been effed up bad by the sheer gore he's just seen. Well, Izuku couldn't blame him. It's not every day that you almost kill your friend, technically he did, but hey, and see their intestines hanging out. Or discover that there's something wrong with their genes and that they are technically a wanted refugee. So Izuku explained everything to him, despite the mantra clamoring inside his head, despite the pounding headache from not having died in so long and having bled out again, despite the years and decades of reassurances and backup plans and promises to himself that he would never tell. He'd forgotten his mother's voice a few decades ago and her face is starting to blur. He doesn't even remember what her name was and he would never know again. All because he has a useless FING meta ability. And his friend is going to die while he watches and life will go on without him and the earth will keep on spinning despite everything. Karuto would die one day too and he can't do shit about it because he's the only one with a too long lifespan here. Hey, man, it's okay, calm the F down. Karuto pats his back with calloused hands from the explosions that he loved making in the labs and the knife cuts when they need to dissect stuff. Izuku looks at Karuto, 27 years old, and sees. He sees the faint stubble that's appearing and narrowed, sharper chin, the disappearing baby fat from 21, and the lean muscles decorating his arms and the thin shades on his face that paints adulthood. And then Izuku looks at himself and sees a pitiful child with the eyes that hold years of pent-up weather, shoulders a little too tense for the weight it had to learn to carry. I won't judge you or anything, Karuto then says, I know it must SCK. That's a euphemism, Izuku shoots back. Still a FING brat, you are, Karuto snorts. It almost seems like things are more normal again. But after a boring but calm decade of pretty much nothing for Izuku, but Karuto has acquired a family and has a child that has the exact same spiky hair as he did, then things go to shit, again, but this time the price isn't on Izuku but on Karuto, because, what else, he died. Izuku wished he could hunt down whoever did it, but he knows that he needs to help Karuto's family first so he deposits a huge sum of money in Mrs. Bakugo's bank and wanders off again, just so he doesn't lose himself completely. Izuku finds a child, one day. He has white hair and an adorable but sickly little brother. He seems to love him a lot and protects him. But he has heard of rumors, from the underworld, that the child could take away meta abilities and give them away. He knows it's wrong, morally wrong, and that thousands of things could go wrong. But he goes anyway. Hello, the child says. He did not tell him his name, but the little brother's name is Yoichi. He is wary of Izuku, he could see that much. Hi, Izuku says eloquently. He couldn't say it. He couldn't do it. He couldn't. Do you have a meta ability? The boy asks. Izuku nods. He has taken them to a secluded place, where his brother couldn't hear. How sweet, children are. Izuku takes a deep breath and he says it anyways. Could you, take my meta ability away? I don't like it. What is it? The boy looks curious and cautious. Izuku can't blame him. Immortality. The boy's eyes are wide and seeing into Izuku's soul. Is it a meta ability? That's, OF dash. So cool. Can you live forever? Do you just not die? What happens when you sustain a fatal injury? Do you feel pain? Are you really a teenager or a millennia-old vampire? Gasp. Are you the first meta ability user? Holy shit. Oh wow. That was not what Izuku was expecting, but he could understand the boy. Meta abilities are just so interesting. Izuku would totally be like him if he was in his shoes. But he's actually not the white-haired boy and he's probably about to bestow upon him the worst torture known to mankind. But before he could consider, the boy reached out with his hands to grasp his exposed arms. He wore a glove, but it seems that was not enough, and then he pulled. At that moment, all Izuku could think of is the voices clamoring inside his head saying no, 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 no. But nothing. Oh. Do you need the other party's permission to take their quirks? Izuku asks. No, the boy's brows were furrowed and for a moment, Izuku saw a criminal mastermind of the underworld but he brushes that thought away because it's unreasonable. He's just a child, after all. When he left, Izuku found out that his quirk could only be given with his XPLCT permission and if he was truly willing to push such a fate upon another. This is both a blessing and a curse, but Izuku comforts himself in the fact that had he given such a quirk to a child with so much potential, he may one day turn to villainy and use that quirk to his advantage and the world would be shrouded in darkness. Truthfully, it's not like Izuku would really care, he's lived too long and seen too many people turn that way, but he thinks it's being unfair to the child because he's only but a child. And that's why he would probably not do many bad things with his meta ability, but it's just that Izuku would feel a moral disparity even in the afterlife at throwing such a curse onto someone else. So he went away and slept for a few years, maybe even a decade, and could only hope that when he wakes up things don't completely go to shit again. He tried to search for quirks that could erase other quirks but found none. He gave up the search for immortality quirk soon after, because it's fruitless. He just wants the boredom to end, or else he'll go crazy. It's probably been a century or so. Or a dozen decades of years, he can't remember at all. That should be worrying, but Izuku is excited at the prospect because it means that he could finally forget everything. He doesn't think of Karuto, but he turns his head away at ash blonde heads and avoids interaction like the social butterfly he is. It's probably unhealthy, but Izuku can't care less. He's too tired from his decade-long nap. Memories of Karuto keeps on playing in his dreams during those 10 too long but too short years, and he almost feels rejoiced to wake up in his apartment, which has miraculously not been taken down yet, and the fact that he's not in a FING morgue, until, of course, he realizes that things are wrong the moment he steps outside. And then he realizes that the kid, the child that he believed to be an innocent little angel who loved and protected his younger brother, is now the supervillain, the bogeyman of the dawn of quirks as they've called it. Wait, meta abilities are called quirks now? Izuku doesn't know if he should laugh or cry because both options are quite tempting right now. He was quite fond of Yoichi and he wonders what he's up to now. Wait, what if he's dead? Is that why the boy who they now call All for One Foot, which Izuku finds really FING pretentious by the way, has turned to villainy? There's too much to do, but Izuku is a man with too much time on his hands than anything else, so he starts investigating. He has a feeling that he won't like what he finds, and it's true. Apparently, they've started this campaign of vigilantes and villains. Quirk discrimination is as bad as ever, and whoever has a quirk, or whoever has a familial relation to a quirked member of society, since they finally discovered that quirks are genetic, good job. Do you want an award? Which is bullshit, but the last time he called that on someone he was kicked out of their facility, so he prefers to not do that to an entire branch of government officials. But hey, since Izuku can't technically be killed, will they just subject him to mental torture instead? That's highly likely, but since Izuku has never been trained for verbal altercations and psychological warfare like this, he doesn't really want to risk his current precarious predicament. Apparently, the government is at its all-time low and Izuku is debating on whether or not he should just take a vacation abroad, but decided otherwise because he did kind of want to see what the ever-loving F is actually going on in Japan. It almost reminds Izuku of an anime he's seen a century or so ago, which is not very great because the best word to describe this entire state right now is just dystopian. Well, Izuku isn't a politician, but since he studied civil laws before, he could say that the government is kind of effed up. But, politics. Anyway. He ends up tracking down All for One, undramatically, at a coffee shop that he took the siblings to once when they were younger. He prides himself on being able to track him down so easily, but maybe he's just getting old and senile. You still look so young, All for One marveled. Izuku smiles lopsidedly. And you are a brat as always. They talk about quirks and tread on shallow waters, because none of them are brave enough to step into the unknown boundaries. Izuku knows that All for One can't kill him, and now he's kind of glad that he didn't offer his quirk to the supervillain. But eventually, someone has to speak up. So how is Yoichi-kun doing? Izuku says, deceptively casual. He did not expect the glass in All for One's hand to shatter into smithereens. He also definitely did not jump. The only other two unknowing customers' heads turn to them, but they don't say anything. Izuku wishes he lived a normal life for the 1000th time. He was quite fond of Yoichi, despite them sharing so little time together. He's not as close to him as Karuto or All for One was to his younger brother, but he liked talking to him. He was a very pleasant child. I would hate it if anything bad happened to Yoichi, Izuku says. All for One doesn't move, nor speak. Izuku can be intimidating when he wills himself to, and him being able to imprint himself onto the younger and more innocent version of All for One gives him an advantage over everything else. How about you come with me, and then you'll understand. I promise, All for One says, standing up. Izuku knows better than to trust the supervillain, and he must know it too, but since Izuku has practically nothing to lose, he finds himself barely caring. He stands with All for One and they leave the small coffee shop on street. Long time no see, Yoichi-kun, Izuku says. Yoichi is still as easily sick and frail as ever. But he's there nonetheless, and he's grown even taller than Izuku now. Dmed brat. Hello, Izuku-san, Yoichi says. He's still very polite. All for One probably told him about his immortality at some point, and how it couldn't be forcefully taken. He's kind of glad Yoichi is quirkless. They sit awkwardly in the parlor. In a secluded place where all for one can't eavesdrop, of course. It's truly a shame that the siblings fell apart, but it couldn't be helped, their ideals were too different. After all, Yoichi dislikes All for One's ways while All for One just wants the best for Yoichi, even though he is technically the leader of a villain organization. It's entertaining, like a reality show. I'm going to try Vigilante, Izuku says to the silence, want to join me? Of course, Yoichi said no. And then he stood up and left angrily. A sour taste rises up to Izuku's mouth but he could barely blame Yoichi. After all, he, too, didn't understand why he even told him that. He wants to sleep for another decade but decides against it eventually. Izuku has been many things in his long life, has done more things, and has seen even more of those things. So far the list is way too long for him to even count, but recently, he has done the following: conspiring with a villain, becoming an information dealer, becoming a semi-villain, becoming a vigilante, hacked into government files, experimented on quirks and whatnot, finished a PhD on the study of latent human evolution, and, teaming up with the man who is currently trying to rule the underworld of Japan. All for One has always been an interesting man. He didn't want to give the specifics of his quirk to Izuku, and while he could understand why, probably because Izuku wouldn't give him any more than what he already knew, that didn't do much to satiate his curiosity. However, mysteries are only fun when he has to make an effort in pursuit of the answers, and he hasn't been bored out of his mind lately, so he thinks that he can suffice with this occupation. Sometimes, Izuku thinks that All for One is kind of pitiful. He sees All for One as more of a vigilante than a villain if anything, despite the disdain his brother holds for him. His plans to overthrow the current government are also very intriguing. Izuku has to agree with him on this matter, though, because as someone who has lived through a century observing human societies, this era of governments is truly the laxest and most deceitful. Izuku doesn't really understand why they would want to fend off every single person who had quirks, even though some of them had turned to bad deeds. Why couldn't they just keep the good ones in check? Izuku mostly watched. He didn't want to get any more blood than what was needed on his hands as much as possible, except for his own, after all. If this gets boring, he can just leave. Like what he always does. He doesn't understand, All for One told him bitterly one day, he is too misguided by their traditional ways of thinking. His frail health has never let him go outside and see the wider views. That's a true shame, Izuku says. Do you plan on doing anything about it? You seem to love him a lot. Of course, there was a glint in All for One's eyes as his expression turned from mellowed-out anger to twisted determination. If he keeps on failing to see the points that I have and will spend the rest of my life making, then I will have to show it to him. Izuku's eyebrows traveled upwards. You're gonna offer him a quirk, in an era where it is the equivalent of a death sentence. It's for his own good, All for One spat, and Izuku couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie wash up to him again from centuries ago, where he witnessed the same determination and drives leading up to wars and bloodshed, vendetta following wherever it went. I just want the best for him. Why can't he see that? You are too caring for your own good, Izuku says. You always act like you don't care. Karuto's words were ringing in his ears, past memories unrelenting and clinging on, but I know you are too kind and that's why you're always suffering, even if you don't notice it. Bullshit. He is my brother, and I will do anything and everything. Yoichi wouldn't want that, he wants to protest for him. Yoichi's complicated. He sees the world in only 3 shades. But for what? What's the point, if they refuse to listen and comprehend your true motives at all? Izuku doesn't say it out loud. Because he doesn't care, never truly did, no matter what they say. All for One doesn't know about his past, doesn't know what he's made by the marks on his hands. He doesn't even know himself, and he doesn't know how much longer he could take comfort in the fact that he stands in a lighter shade of gray than All for One before that changes, too. There really wasn't any way that his day-month-year could get worse, but somehow it did, and Izuku wants to chop the demon's head off, but unfortunately, he is only an immortal and powerless wet, floppy noodle. You really didn't have to assassinate Karuto to get my attention, Izuku says. It's been 2 decades, maybe even more since Karuto's death, but the old well of dried-up anguish comes rushing back anew. You just needed to ask. He's angry for more than that. Izuku should feel guilty at the silent cheer that envelopes him for discovering an emotion that has been left to the dust for so long. The anger is overbearing, and All for One must have seen something on his face, or just sensed something from his aura because the atmosphere is stone cold and frozen. He's pretty sure he doesn't have an ice quirk or something. You would have found me too boring, All for One says, there is nothing in this world that is sacred to you anymore. Do you think I wouldn't know? Do you think Yoichi's stupid? Izuku doesn't express his anger. He makes people feel it. The years of experience that he's more likely to forget are forever etched into his bones and the pain would not let him go. He lets the ice slip out and engulfs the tense silence shrouding the two old legends. Izuku looks at All for One and sees a youthful, white-haired man who can't be over his 30s. He feels sick, because why would anyone try to subject themselves to the suffering that Izuku would hand to literally anything else on a silver platter? The hope left to rot at the bottom of his chest rises in full bloom and Izuku can't squash it down enough. All for One does not look at him, but there's a weird tinge to his voice that makes him seem almost human. Of course, between the two of them, All for One is definitely a mere mortal, but there's something about a powerful and deranged sociopath that makes them especially dangerous. I have recently acquired a longevity quirk. All for One breaks the silence. If true immortality can never be achieved in anyone else, does this mean that Izuku is a god? To him, All for One is actually more neutral than anything. Though that may change in due time, Izuku thinks that this is just the result of a man pushed much too far, further than how much he could go. Society at its best, he supposes. Karuto's name rests bitter on his tongue. Well, at least All for One had the decency to preserve his body. His true name belongs on a piece of a cold and moss-infested stone slab. There is no true immortality. Izuku finally speaks his thoughts. If All for One still insists on seeing him as an elder, he'll just have to play along. Think about world domination. We could be gods. Coming from All for One, that almost sounded like a grand fing joke. Against his better judgment, Izuku throws his head back and laughs, hollow and empty, the sound grating to even his very own ears. All for One watches him warily, so he laughs again. Eventually, he calms down, and he leans back on a willow tree that he hadn't noticed had been there. Izuku tilts his head and gives a deranged, lopsided smile, like a snake in the grass and very effective in intimidating a supervillain. What makes you think that I'm not already a god? Izuku should really have tried harder because the next thing he knew, Yoichi got thrown in a fing vault of all things, by All for One. It also turns out that the Hellspawn gave him a power stockpiling quirk, thinking that he was quirkless, and instead, he got a big fing surprise because Yoichi did have a quirk, even though it's pretty fing useless without All for One because it's basically passing on whatever quirk the user has to others through DNA consummation. He's long retired from his vigilante activity, because what does the government get off high on, giving him a lame vigilante name? And then he thought that it would be a good idea to go and reconcile with Yoichi and he came back to see him getting vaulted by All for One, which is just great. But you know what's better? All for One apparently has a task force after him now, so what could Izuku do other than give them his full support and avenge every innocent soul that Hellspawn has forsaken? Actually, no, he's not that righteous. Izuku's still only sore about the fact that All for One killed Karuto than anything else, but he knows that he should have protected him, but look where that got him. Izuku couldn't pass off the chance to flip All for One off as he passed him by, and what's weird is that he actually made no move to stop them from rescuing his brother. That may or may not have something to do with Izuku threatening him that day, but what's been done is done. You reap what you sow, right? Okay, Izuku says to the AFO task force leader, who was currently clad in a military jacket and looks suspiciously like a Karuto with a big scar on his face with his light-colored spiky hair and slitted eyes and all. Here's what we are going to do dash. I hope you know that I trust you as far as I could throw you, and it's quite far, not Karuto says. Izuku doesn't even bother to remember his name because he's being really fing annoying right now. He talks like Karuto too, but the fact that he's taunting Izuku's height and build is grating on his nerves. Yeah. I hope you also know that I don't care, Izuku says. I don't think you understand the situation right now. All for One is holding his younger, innocent brother in a vault after forcefully giving him a quirk. I think that's quite effed up, don't you think? The squadron commander says nothing. Izuku doesn't wait for him to gather his thoughts and he throws a map in his face. It's the location of the vault that he kept Yoichi in. We have to go as soon as possible. Understandably, All for One found them before they could get to Yoichi. And Izuku felt more anger than fear. The squadron commander looked at him as if he was crazy, because how could he? What are you even doing this for? Izuku says icily. There's another way that doesn't involve killing or vaulting people, you know. If they can't accept me then I'll find a way, the shell of the man whom All for One used to be says, deranged. I'll find a way to show them. And then they'll regret being blind. He gets to Izuku before he could blink, but fails to take his quirk. He stabs Izuku's lungs and heart and slams his skull down on the asphalt. The squadron commander watches in terror as he hears the muffled crunch of bones breaking and blood splattering and he readies himself to use his quirk. Izuku gets up a moment later when All for One jumps back. I thought, Izuku says, blood still dripping down his face and nose and just everywhere but there's barely a scratch on him. He feels his brains burning and he sees white behind his eyelids but he doesn't let his voice waver. That you'd have learned your lesson by now. The squadron commander levels his gun to aim for All for One. What great panache. All for One flees, like the coward he is. Izuku doesn't allow himself to feel bad for him this time. It's a wonder he hadn't wiped his blood off of the asphalt with the squadron commander, but he figures that they should be relieved. Not a word, Izuku says to him. He nods shakily. They find Yoichi sometime later in the middle of the night when it is pouring in the underground of Japan. He looks really effed up, but anyone would be when they've spent so long in a vault. Seriously, what was All for One thinking? Yoichi gasps when he sees him. Izuku-san. No need for formalities, it's just Izuku here, Izuku says. He shoves a bottle of Coke and a Snickers bar into the poor child, man's hands. Here, have a Coke and Snickers. You need some electrolytes. The other two physically older men in the room, Vault, stares at him weirdly but Izuku pays them no mind. Yoichi looks like he's been starving himself and Izuku would have loved to take him to the cafe on Street 17 to get a chocolate muffin, had they not been strung in the middle of a war powered by quirks. All for One told me that he gave you a quirk, Izuku says into the silence. The squadron commander tenses up slightly. Yes. And then he told them both about his hidden quirk, which is a rather useless ability to pass down his quirks through DNA, and the power stockpile quirk that his dear older brother had forced onto him. Izuku frankly finds it extremely ironic, because they fated siblings who hated each other just so happen to have quirks that complement each other perfectly. Until Yoichi revealed that the two quirks have merged into one for all, and had offered the quirk to Izuku so that they could defeat All for One. But this quirk of yours can store any quirk and pass it down to the next holder through the consummation of DNA, Izuku repeats slowly, each syllable enunciated one by one as if he was coercing a child. Actually, he practically was, because this is a really bad idea. Yes. And I was wondering if you'd like to have it, Yoichi says. Oh God. Oh gods. Yoichi is a great person but Izuku thinks he forgot just what his quirk is now. I don't think you understand, Izuku says carefully, just what my quirk is. Because your quirk can store multiple quirks, presumably, so it can possibly store my quirk too and then I can't even pick a successor when I decide that I don't want the quirk. The squadron commander decides to use this moment to interrupt and goddamn it's not fair for him to still look composed and cool and calm even while saying such idiotic and irrelevant things. Isn't he All for One's brother? Shouldn't you be warier of him? Both associates of All for One turns their heads towards him so fast, they could have gotten whiplash. Shut up. Let me explain. I don't see how your quirk is a problem though, Yoichi says. Well, Izuku says, I actually can't die, which is just great, you know. I have to create fake identities every few decades so people don't get suspicious since they love experimenting on humans, which is absolutely fantastic. Not saying that this quirk isn't good and all, but I don't want this quirk. It's distinct and flashy, so I'd get found out very easily. I hope you understand my struggle and pain. They look at him understandably confused. But Yoichi shrugs and offers the FING squadron commander his quirk, which is just baffling at this point because the very same man just insulted Yoichi because of his blood ties. But hey, at least they resolved their issues now. Let's get this clear. We all hate All for One. Yoichi says. Great, because here's what we're gonna do. Which basically comprised of attempted assassinations on All for One, and failing miserably, and finding the next successor in case they fail. Which, they obviously did, but Izuku promised Yoichi that he's try to look out for the second holder of One for All. And then, Izuku knew it would happen, just not so soon. But it happened anyways, so Izuku would just ave to deal with it, like what he dealt with when Karuto died, because, obviously, Yoichi died a tragic death by the Hellspawn's hands too. Izuku tried not to grieve. He tried. He also tried to not blame himself for his death, but it's a good thing he doesn't need to sleep as much, because his endless nights would be plagued with the jarring picture of a bloody Yoichi impaled on black tendrils. Wouldn't it be fun if we started a hero school? Katsumi Bakugo, a descendant of Karuto Bakugo, says. She has a strangely powerful trinitroxypropane quirk, which allows her to facilitate and create violent chemical reactions from her body fluids, which is just a little disgusting but it also made her smell like sickly sweet caramel cookies. Izuku doesn't know what he did, probably the consequence of trying to socialize, but, to get what's basically an equivalent of a female version of his dead best friend as his neighbor, but he lets it be. It must also be a silent F.U. to Izuku from Karuto because he made his descendants keep the Bakugo surname, which is why the first thing Izuku does when he sees the nameplate beside his house is to bang his head on his garage doors. You know what, okay, then, Izuku says because there really isn't much else to do and besides the training facilities provided by the Hero Public Safety Commission, there are no known hero schools in Japan. And maybe it will satiate his boredom just a little bit. Plus, he really wants to get back at All for One for killing Yoichi and worse, assassinating Karuto, and what better way than to open a Fing hero school and give the metaphorical middle finger to the demon incarnate. And then they did exactly that. Katsumi named the hero school UA, which is a lame punny name in Izuku's opinion, because, UEI and IU but hey. But Izuku didn't want his name to be recorded anywhere people could access, which Katsumi found strange, which was only natural because she was under the impression that Izuku had a healing quirk. Well, technically. Anyways, the hero school somehow go through the Hero Commission, they appealed for teaching licenses and began to recruit teachers. It was going rather smoothly, and Katsumi hung a portrait of herself in the alumni room as the principal. Izuku refused to take a photo no matter what. Although, he did reluctantly allow her to take a group photo along with the rest of the staff, hiding most of his face behind Katsumi's shoulders. Hiroki-san, or rather, Pro-Hero Shogun, had laughed at him, saying that he was far too shy for someone seemingly so experienced. So when Katsumi eventually got married to Hiroki-san after 2 decades, Izuku had to help pick out another principal. "Why don't you want to be the principal, anyway?" Katsumi had asked. Izuku cringed because he didn't usually wear disguises. The most was using makeup to make his face seem older and wear platforms, and he was currently using his original name, Midoriya Izuku, so if his records had somehow been unearthed by some unsavory people the results wouldn't be very pretty. Yeah, how do you suddenly tell your friend that you're actually an immortal who had actually been buddies with the worst supervillain Japan had ever seen? Knowing Katsumi's temper, she'd probably kill him even with his quirk. So he brushed it off and found the perfect, heroic, and experienced pro-hero Kaiser to take Katsumi's place. Kaiser was great at leading and had the heart of gold, so Katsumi was, well, maybe she was a little sour, still, but she had been satisfied. Izuku himself had already seen and done all there is to see long before Katsumi had to retire, and now that she actually was gone, there was nothing left to do. So he left UA and applied for an analyst position in the Hero Commission. He has been interested in their inner workings for a while, anyway. In hindsight, this hadn't been one of Izuku's brighter ideas, but seeing as he can't really die, there really was no merit to stupidity at this point. Right? Somehow, he actually did land a well-paying job at the Hero Commission as an underground agent and part-time analyst, under the name Akatani Mikumo, or rather, Dr. Akatani. He would have preferred to do more in-house work, but they were understaffed in the Covert Ops and Clandestine Missions division, since, apparently, they weren't stealthy enough, or didn't have stealth-related quirks. Which is just bullshit, because Izuku can do stealth fine without having that, so Izuku had to fill in the spots sometimes. His co-workers were rather nice, but Izuku noticed that a lot of them were either power-hungry or rather unethical at times. The Hero Society has only been established for, 7 decades? And they have already forgotten what heroics truly is. Though Izuku can't exactly blame them, heroics was an industry, after all. He wrinkled his nose at times when they would silence people who got in their way, but Izuku was no pillar of morals. He was just there. So he shouldn't be expected to do anything. And he didn't. Izuku was already busy enough with trying to maintain his facade and secret identities. Juggling all his jobs and faces took up a lot of time, but who was Izuku if not for one of too much excess time? He thought nothing would go wrong. He's been doing this for ages, after all. It's not like they could actually have any evidence. Plus, even if they did suspect him, Izuku wouldn't have done anything illegal. If they did want to test his quirk, then human experimentation was off the table. He thought it would remain this way. Until the day when Izuku watched everything go to shit because of his incompetence and ignorance. Akatani-sensei, Miyoko-san, the president, had come to Izuku's office personally one day. Normally, this wouldn't be an extremely rare occurrence, but she only came when she had something important to say. "There's something that had recently come to our attention. I was wondering if you could spare some time for us to discuss it." "Of course," he said, still in his meek and polite Akatani Yami Mikumo mode. "What dash? Or should I say," Miyoko continued ruthlessly, "rude, Midoriya Izuku." "Oh, okay," he effed up big time. Nothing new. Except, Miyoko-san had guards and a plethora of cannon fodder and firepower on her side. This was like the entire all-for-one situation again, except that this time, it may be worse. Like Unit Inhumane. "What?" Izuku says, still reeling from the shock. "Oh, Midoriya-kun, you, of all people, should know better than this," the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission says, still smiling with too many teeth. Like a predator pinning down its prey. "After all, you surely had more experience than what you look." Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He didn't really need to breathe, or drink water, or eat to survive. But at that moment, he felt as if he was going to finally suffocate and die. The thought brought comfort, of all things, to his chest. And this should have been the final straw in the shack, should have been the final warning that would save him from the inevitable fate, but there was really nothing that he could do than to watch and follow the president numbly, feeling hollow, to the examination room. He'd made one mistake too many. The anesthetic is a good way to start. He would regret everything. But until then. Progress report for Midoriya Izuku Akatani Mikumo, test subject number 00273. Species, human. Age, unknown, error code, 404. Physical age, 15.62 years. Date of birth, unknown, possibly before the dawn of Quirks, error code, 404. Quirk, immortality. Quirk description, the user has an elongated lifespan. The user's telomerase automatically replenishes and creates a strong genetic shelter to preserve cell growth and multiplication. There are no known drawbacks. The user also has extremely fast and effective healing, and the test subject's body is unsusceptible to fatal blows and damages. Quirk suppressants have yet to work on him, and the effects of erasing his quirk have yet to be tested for the lack of an erasure quirk. Notes, his telomerase and genetic information cannot be copied, no matter what method we used. Constant torture and infliction of pain have proved that number 00273 is unable to feel pain as regular humans do, although his nervous system has not been compromised. Even tethered limbs can grow back in the span of minutes, sometimes even seconds. There are too many things that science cannot explain about this quirk. He is a valuable test subject. However, he is extremely intelligent and has shown signs of escape, but pulls back just before we could get to him. Restraints needed. His mental health seems to be deteriorating. Keep him in check. From Tokunaga Miyoko Mayokota Kanaga at hspc.gov.jp. 2. Garaki Kudai Garaki at jakamedical.gov.jp. CC, Shigaraki Hisashi Hisashishigaraki at jakamedical.gov.jp. Subject, Extensive Medical Report, number 00273, 3.2.8. Dear Garaki-san. Here are the reports, as per your request. Name, Midoriya Izuku, Akatani Mikumo. SID, number 00273, Hertz 07. Notes. We are still unable to access the subject's DNA clearly, even with a DNA modification viewing quirk in hand. The subject still possesses the extra toe joint which indicates quirklessness, though it may be one of the rare cases. In most scenarios, that would have been the assumption. However, his genome anatomy would indicate that he is, indeed, quirkless, and it would be biologically impossible for this to be achieved, for chromosome 20, the only part that was able to be extracted from the subject's cell's mitochondria, is missing. Chromosome 20 is the part of the genome where the quirk factor and plus alpha factor lies, so it would make no sense for him to possess a quirk. Extensive studies have shown that his body is also that of the pre-quirk humans. There is no adaptation whatsoever to any potential meta-abilities. Despite not being able to access the DNA strands fully, our researchers have noted that their previous theory about having a self-replenishing telomerase system is, in fact, correct. This is the basis of biological immortality, though we are still not sure if this would count as true immortality. The effects of every single cause of death have yet to be tested, including HIV infections and nuclear modification, etc., which are due to the fact that we do not yet know the subject's DNA composition. It is most likely that the subject possesses infinite cell reparation abilities, as suggested by his almost instantaneous healing of any type of physical trauma, aside from amputated limbs, which will still grow back with a longer duration. Though we have still yet to verify this theory considering we are currently unable to observe his cells during metabolic processes, which is most likely due to his quirk's natural response to preventing its secret, and by extension, means of replication being uncovered. As mentioned before, no form of quirk suppression. The blood type results also leave much to be desired. However, you should feel pleased to know that we seem to be getting closer to the second final stage of testing. All that awaits us is observation and another round of physical examination. True immortality has always been a dream for humans, and it seems that we have finally found something even close to it. Pseudo-immortality, you may call it. With Midoriya Izuku, we will be achieving a major scientific and medical breakthrough. This is more than just a miracle, and if we are patient, we should be able to publish these studies in a year or two, maybe even a few months. I await your response and views on this topic, Dr. Garaki and Mr. Hisashi. Yours truly, Tokunaga Miyoko, 8th Chief President of the HSPC. He doesn't know how long he's been stuck here. A few years? He can't remember. But he does know that he should and has the ability to get out of here. He can live forever. Water a few years off the deck? It's not like he can be traumatized. He doesn't even need to sleep. It can't haunt him, not when he's seen the corpse of his friend bloody on the ground because of him. He has to do something about this. Izuku can't say that he's not interested in the lab results. The doctors aren't allowed to talk to him and Izuku only had immortal healing, not super strength to get out of here. But there is a way. Izuku may never have been exactly trained in terms of physical altercations despite being unfairly good at it. Psychological warfare is always on the table. As long as he knows what he's doing, even if he's lost the battle, he can win the war. In some way or another. He was in a lab, for sure. A commission facility, that much is obvious. There are no exact coordinates. Miyoko-san comes to visit sometimes, though it was usually to check on his statistics and mental condition. There were others, less lost than bound to the facility like him. No, he could get out if he wanted to. He's just choosing not to because he's curious. Yes, that's what he tells himself every day. There is still doubt nagging at the back of his brain sometimes, every day, but he's eventually come to terms with it. Miyoko had talked to him about the other patients, no, experimentation subjects. Apparently, the others didn't have it as bad as him, they were just being observed passively aside from a few others who had interesting abilities, like him, so to say. Hello, Izuku says, not even bothering to turn around to look at Miyoko. He already knew that she was here from the nearly silent footsteps. Why, hello there, Midoriya-kun, Miyoko tuts. To be honest, it was driving Izuku mad to not be able to read his own reports about himself, which is just really unfair, but whatever. At least, Miyoko talked to him, which was probably the only thing preventing him from lashing out at all, even if he hated her guts. Let the commission keep their secrets. It's not like they'd be able to for much longer. Because the plan is already being set in motion. Miyoko-san, Izuku says, suave and pleasantly, let's strike a deal. You want to have access to a computer, which you can potentially use to hijack our systems and escape? Miyoko-san says, voice devoid of any emotion, I thought death and trauma would have taught you to be less obvious. Izuku laughs. And then he laughs until Miyoko's scowl has reached past the dangerous level. You and I both know that you cannot even dream of containing me, Izuku says, and he's bluffing because this is currently the only solution, actually. Not that he wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. But because Izuku is actually dignified and he thinks he ought to deserve this after being cooped up in this place for over 5 years. So you do well to not threaten me, of all things. Miyoko scowls even more, which should not be possible considering Izuku's certainly on the fact that she had reached max annoyance. And you think you are in a position to threaten me? Oh, Izuku says, of course. If you're still so caught up in dissecting true immortality, then by this time you should already know that I'm considered a god, of sorts. She ended up agreeing as most people did. It always amazed Izuku how easily humans gave into the unknown. There were files. Way too many is what a normal human being would say if they were the receiving test subject of Midoriya Izuku's medical reports, which are just basically a glorified representation of grossly legalized human experimentation studies on an actual living human. Not that Izuku actually considered himself a human or an alive one, for all the times he'd surely have died. But semantics. It's truly a great decision to have taken biology and human sociology to a PhD level that few dozen decades ago. Or a few decades. Izuku's not sure how much time exactly has passed. The only time range that he was sure of was the number of years he'd spent in this goddamned lab facility, 5.85 years, almost 6 years. At this point, Izuku shouldn't even be surprised. 6 years is a relatively short time compared to the near 2 centuries he'd spent walking this earth. But still, 6 years. He could have done a lot with that. Though he has to admit, the research was good. He wouldn't have been able to do such an extensive study and analysis on his own biological structure and immortality ruses in a mere 6 years. Plus, it was mostly for free. Okay, maybe he shouldn't call the 6 years of torture and repeated, numerous, read, 274, attempts on his life, which, expectedly, all failed. The most significant, daring tries had been direct attacks on his DNA with infected cancer cells, though they were seemingly devoured by his immune system. Most deaths are caused by either disease, aging, or specifically, DNA damage. Those methods have proven to be completely null. That leaves physical trauma. Even though his extended, constantly self-replenishing, telomeres and a seemingly endless supply of chromatin membranes make him biologically immortal, one should still be able to die an extremely painful death from blunt force and blood loss. Apparently Izuku's instant healing regeneration, somehow it's a part of both? Prevents that. Oh, right, there is still the topic of whether it's healing or regeneration. Most pseudo-immortal quirked individuals possess either healing or regeneration, which is how some of them seem infallible and, to some extent, unkillable because of their regeneration of telomeres and sped-up healing regeneration of wounds before they die. Though, none of that can even hold a candle to Izuku's almost, for the lack of better wording, godlike healing abilities. Blood is constantly being replenished. Izuku cannot die from starvation, dehydration, asphyxiation nor brain damage, though he can still suffer from its effects. Of course, he still feels pain, and as they said, Izuku's nervous system has not been altered or compromised. He's still in peak condition. Which is why this makes absolutely no sense, but also the reason why Izuku has resolutely given up on trying to dissect his quirk as the researchers did. Maybe if Izuku let it be, he'd just live forever. Forever and for all eternity, everlasting and never ceasing. That's what true immortality is, right? So Izuku will, theoretically, live until the day humanity ceases to exist. Maybe he'd die with them unless he's actually a god, wander through the earth on his own, until, inevitably, this huge ball of a magnet is swallowed up by the solar system's central star, and then, one day, inevitable drift amidst the mass of dark matter when the solar system, too, dies in an extraordinary supernova explosion, and the Milky Way collapses into its black hole too, and the universe folds in on itself. Following the final heat death. He recalls the people who had expressed their desire to live longer, to be immortal. Though, the desire for immortality is practically a paradox, and the wish for death upon desire is much more useful. Izuku can't say that he's not jealous of dead people. Pretty neat, right? The existential crisis is just great. Izuku looks up from his computer. The system dismantlement code has already been set into motion. It should kick in soon to see his physician approaching him with a clipboard. It's time to execute the plan. Sorry about this, Izuku says, because it's always good to be polite. Before Harada-sensei could finish his sentence, Izuku has snuck behind him and swiftly delivered a clean chop to the back of his neck, causing him to immediately pass out. The vitality sensor on his wrist was then promptly relocated to Izuku's own wrist, preventing the data loggers from detecting any irregularities in case of the code failure. Izuku hasn't been in action for 6 years and he has probably gotten rusty, but the natural talent for martial arts is still there, and wow, it does feel good to take someone out after these long, skyless years. He wonders why he didn't do it sooner, probably because he was waiting for the lab to actually obtain clear results on his condition. It's the only thing they're good for now, anyway. Kicking the limp body of the way of the door, Izuku crouched low and waited for Nurse Rinka to come in with her tray of equipment. She always came in after Harada-sensei, and, true to routine, the petite woman just turned the corner with her cart. Izuku disarmed her and took her down the same way he did to Harada-sensei. He didn't worry much about being caught on the security cameras because this was, mostly, a blind spot, and even if people did come, Izuku can probably get past them. Izuku crept along the corridor towards the next door. Today, the left wing where the only 2 remaining alive test subjects were located was fairly deserted for a meeting. Izuku knew about that when he not so accidentally snooped into Miyoko's files. Speaking of which, he probably should find out whoever the Dr. Garaki was. It would be a pain to get rid of all evidence of him here completely. Now he needed to get to test subject 319, retrieve their files, and finally burn this godforsaken facility down to the curb, along with the commission members in it. Hey, the boy says, voice muffled. Nezu stares at him. And then he stares some more, because what the the boy says again, I'm here to get us out of here? He made quick work of the glass frame and unscrews the one-way glass panes on the wall, the only thing keeping the boy from Nezu no, 319 in his torture room. Wait, you are 319, right? The boy, who had green hair and even greener eyes with symmetrical freckles dusted across his cheeks, finally got the glass down but turns his head to check the number plate beside it before climbing in, staring at 319 hard, and it is only then that he realizes that the boy had asked him a question and he was expected to answer it. Yes? Nezu says, and then the full realization of the situation dawned on him, an extremely late revelation despite his genius quirk, but honestly, that would happen to you too had you been locked and isolated to be experimented on somewhere. And anyway, did he just imply that he would help them escape? Seeing from the boy's uniform, it became painfully obvious to 319 that, the boy, the human child, was indeed another test subject, another prisoner in these walls. Oh, great, the boy says as he walks briskly over to, what's your name, by the way? I-319, he was very confused, but he let the boy take off the restraints chaining him to the wall anyway. It's not like anything bad can come out of him doing this. In fact, it's probably for the better. His quirk tells him that, too. The boy looks at him weirdly. What? I mean your name, not your ID. Nezu. Why do you ask? And who are you exactly? 319, Nezu asks, brain finally catching up to whatever is happening right now because it does feel much like a distant dream. He's sure the boy knows this too, provided that he's not just a test administered by the facility to test his fidelity. Which actually makes no sense because they can't expect someone that they tortured for years to be loyal to them. But the fact that this boy was able to break out of his own cell and even come to rescue Nezu itself was, frankly, unbelievable already. So that's great. Just follow me for a bit, I need to destroy our files, the boy says, and because, no offense, that's your name? Also, I am pretty sure my name is a state secret by now, so I, unfortunately, cannot tell you, but hopefully, we will meet again. Actually, the boy trails off and scurries away, motioning for Nezu to follow him, which he does, albeit with his tiny rodent feet. The hallway where the lights were shut and door leading to the main gate of the animal testing lab for those with quirks towards the center of the left wing. Nezu only knew this because he had once sneaked a glance at the president's file and had memorized the contents, however little there is. Meanwhile, the boy went off to the left wing's data logging room, the one with all the computers, and Nezu promptly follows him, because there is practically nowhere else to go. The boy boots up a computer and enters the password so fast that Nezu thought he would sprain his knuckles for a second. He pulls a few flash drives and USBs out of the shelf beside the largest CCTV computer, almost like routine. What are you doing that for? Nezu asks, fumbling with his examination uniform and observing the room for anything out of place. The electricity is still out, and it is a wonder that no herds of quirked armies have come yet, but maybe that's just due to the subtle tapering that the boy made. It's so they don't trace back to us, the boy says, still hyper-focused on the computer. He plugs the flash drives and USBs into the docks. The boy scrolls through a neatly organized database-esque file before typing out a code that projects a loading bar onto the screen, and the boy stretches back. I'm burning this place down the moment we step out of here. Nezu nods because even with his quirk, the current predicament is too much to keep track of and speculate about all at once. Hopefully, the boy succeeds. Hopefully, Nezu can see nature and trees and bushes as green as the boy's hair when he gets out. The bombs have been successfully planted and the database is wiped dry. Izuku licks his lips and watches the forest-shrouded facility building, isolated and its sins unknown to mankind. Not that Izuku was doing this out of a moral obligation. It's just, if the public ever were to find out about him, things would be very difficult for Izuku. Izuku fiddles with the detonator between his fingers. By this point, Miyako and her support staff should have returned to the facility and are searching for him already. If he detonates the bomb now, there's a good chance they'll immediately get blown up, if they were where Izuku thinks they will be. Of course, if they actually didn't die from the explosions, Izuku will just have to get his hands dirty himself. The thought is new and somehow exciting. Izuku has indirectly caused the demise of a few people before, though he has never actively killed someone. Yes, he did torture people, but he's never killed. All for One usually did all the killing. Or his lackeys. He used to read about pre-Quirk era Lovecraftian-esque books written by murderers when he studied psychology, and they usually talked about the person they've killed haunting them for the rest of their lives. It honestly sounded horrifying to Izuku when he was younger. And, providing this was true, then Izuku would have to live with it for God knows how many years. But that's okay. He might regret the decision made from kicks and 2 centuries of suppressed rage, but that is a problem for future Izuku. So he detonates the bombs and watches the building light on fire, smoke escaping everywhere. Izuku smiles, showing the sharp canines. You, Miyako-san says. Harada-sensei and Nurse Rinka are long dead, though no one would have told that it was even them from the charred flesh and clothing. Their bodies were still and limp, the remnants of the fire liking at them. The 8th president of the HSPC looked up from her pained crouch in unbridled fear, and it felt so liberating but wrong yet still. Izuku wonders if this is what All for One feels like when he gets revenge. There was no way to describe it. A twisted form of catharsis, perhaps, because by the time Izuku had his thumb on the detonator he had been long done with the commission. Objectively, he was still standing on a lighter shade of gray than All for One and these bundle of fools. There are things far worse than death for a mortal person, after all. Like torture. Or manipulation. If Izuku was a crueler, pettier man, he would have tortured Miyako and experimented on her, just to let her see how it was like. But he was not petty. This isn't even an equivalent exchange. But whatever goes up has to come down one day, eventually. Izuku agrees, inspecting his nails through the smoke. He doesn't even need to breathe so he wouldn't inhale the particles. That would just ruin the dramatic effect. I wonder what changed. And then he stabs her once, under her shoulder blades. And then he stabs her sides as she thrashes violently. Izuku watches as she bleeds out to death in the fire. His eyes and hands and everywhere burn, and the blood coating his arms have coagulated far sooner due to the fire. But he doesn't care, and his ears continue to ring as the aftermath of Miyoko-san's death played out. The burns were at least second degree, but that was alright, they'd just heal. He's dealt with much worse before. Would you like a job at UA? Izuku says. It was only natural. Nezu didn't have a place to stay, and he had expressed the desire to help society and reshape it. He had an intelligence quirk, and honestly, Izuku just couldn't be bothered to go and find another principal in charge before Kaiser had to eventually retire. Oh, and Nezu had an intelligence quirk high specs, so he would be, almost, perfectly equipped to take care of rowdy, superpowered teenagers. He also trusted Nezu to not turn UA into a goddamned military school where they train children to become literal soldiers. However, he would have to get Nezu licenses for just about everything before that. Though Izuku trusts Nezu with all of that way more than himself, so he's just going to leave that to the future principal to worry about. Oh, and Nezu's a furry, which means that people will either despise him or love him so much that they want to cuddle him. Or maybe that's just a false stigma of Izuku's from back in the 21st century, and with the anthropomorphic quirks now, they think furries would be normal. Oh, dear. Sure, Nezu says. He had to have been in the facility for far longer than Izuku did. He was guessing a decade or so. And the short white stout only has a few months in modern human civilization, and yet he was already more proficient in human communication than Izuku, which he is definitely not salty about. Actually, that might be just because Izuku is extremely emotionally constipated, which would lead to events where there is no way to suppress all that rage inside this tiny noodle 16-year-old body, so he'd have to resort to bloodshed and arson, though Izuku has tried to will him to forget about the fact that he basically destroyed and overthrew an entire government officialized branch party on top of assassinating all of the staff in said branch. Which has just been going splendid, by the way. And then they proceeded to turn in all the paperwork for Nezu's applications and IDs, which was honestly a FING pain, but at this point, Izuku knew better than to escape paperwork. That's a lot, coming from an immortal being. Speaking of which, Nezu probably still didn't know who the hell he actually was. Izuku had taken advantage of the fact that Nezu wasn't able to observe him that accurately during their first meeting since the power was out, and when he did manage to get a better look at Izuku, it was after Izuku had sent him to a temporary hideout and returned from the facility raid. He should probably trust Nezu if he wanted him as an employee in the future, but something gnawed at Izuku's guts and he put on hair dyes and contact lenses anyways. Nezu only knows him as Akatani Mikumo at the moment. He hadn't given him any more information, but he suspects that Nezu knows that he was maintaining a double identity. It was great that he didn't call him out on it, though. He probably figured out how he got his application as a temporary UA teaching assistant appeal as quickly as he did, but the rat did have the intelligence to assist him to find out. It was the right decision to remain anonymous for all these years, then. There was simply no way that Nezu would have suspected him or anything else. He'd made sure that the evidence is well buried, the dirty laundry washed thoroughly, dried, hanged, and folded neatly in the shelves. One day he would tell Nezu. Just not these days. He had someone to visit. Tracking down the sixth user was a pain, but that was to be expected since N was probably one of the first underground heroes who actually knew stealth. Izuku checks the address for the third time and knocks on the mahogany door. It opens to reveal an average-looking man of Izuku's height with black, unassuming hair and narrow eyes. Izuku smiles brightly at him and the door is immediately slammed into his face. How rude, Izuku mutters and pulls out a bobby pin. Though, this should have been a given. The wielder of the most powerful yet secretive quirk in the world, who became an underground hero and is currently in mortal danger, is bound to be a little more cautious. He just wishes that N would actually listen, but since that didn't work, Izuku would just have to use a more forceful method. He picks the door lock. It is twisted back immediately, so Izuku kicks the door down. He maintains a carefully blank, innocent face. I just want to talk. Very non-threatening. Of course, because who would ever say no to such a cute child with cute freckles and curly bushy hair and eyes that occupy half of their face when they're not half-lidded in boredom? And, apparently, there is a sort of astonishment and immaculate horror on the man's face. But he currently has no door to lock, so Izuku stalks straight in and gets to business, not waiting for N to reload. I won't beat around the bush, Izuku says, plopping down on the small couch as if he owned the house. I am here to talk about One for All. And, by extension, All for One. The underground hero's eyes widen in understanding. Izuku laces his fingers together and smiles. They talk about the new course of action. Izuku doesn't tell him everything about himself. He calls himself the successor of the man whom the first and second had trusted, who would eventually help guide the future successors of One for All. And they talk about All for One. Izuku gives him a file full of All for One's recent criminal endeavors and possible locations. You may want to consider choosing a successor before he finds you. He was met with silence. And then the wall, with the half-broken door still dangling on it, breaks completely. The two associates of One for All turn their heads towards the scourge of Japan so fast they almost get whiplash. Speak of the devil, because what the F ever. All for One is here. The devil incarnate smiles and Izuku looks and smiles back at him while he grabbed onto N and ran. Of course, that didn't work. Because Izuku was as good as quirkless in these situations. Because he'd never bothered to train his muscles when he was still actually 16 and now he can never build up physical strength again. Because he didn't have a physical quirk. Because all it took for Hisashi to toss Izuku out of the playing field and absolutely obliterate N as he watches, unable to do anything, was just a simple flick of his fingers. That being said, even if Izuku didn't feel any moral obligation for this, it still felt sickening to watch his friend, past mentee, proceeding to attempt to tear Yoichi's successor to bits. And as he was about to move, to preserve One for All even if it might cost him for all of eternity, Nana Shimura came to the wasteland of a battlefield, cape-clad in a hero costume. Izuku just had to distract All for One for the fraction of a second while N passed on his quirk and let Shimura flee the scene, before All for One can kill her on the spot. He can probably do it, it's mostly a question of if they can do it. But it was easy to get the white-haired man's attention. Izuku does not glance at the direction in which N and Shimura probably were in, but judging from how the multi-quirked man doesn't seem to be going anywhere else right now, Izuku deems it a relevant success. It's such a wonderful thing that Izuku knew exactly what to say. They were alone, to themselves now. Two Schrodinger's friends who have lived several lifetimes, it is only natural that they would have become friends, though it would be weird to call them such. People who share a mutual understanding, perhaps. Birds of a feather flock together, or something like that. Izuku may never be able to forgive him for killing Karuto and Yoichi for the bitterness so grand it may never be bridged, but Izuku feels only fatigue gripping at his nerves. Or maybe it's because of some sickening, innate guilt clawing at his non-existent heart, for what he said did to him all those decades ago, to sculpt him into who he is currently. When two old, jaded acquaintances reunite, one or both are bound to settle the decades of undue debt. All for One has crossed the invisible line some time ago, actually. Izuku is justified to feel distaste. Or maybe it's All for One who deserves to feel distaste. Or both. Either way. Hello, Hisashi, Izuku says, I really expected better from you. Didn't I ever teach you that stealing confidential information is wrong? Especially of a sickly, innocent test subjects. Though I suppose that was mostly your doctor? So blunt as always, All for One is a predator in his natural habitat, and he bares his fangs and smile. You wound me, Izuku-san. Oh, but it's good to see you too. The man-boy is very weird. But Hisashi doesn't say that out loud, because said boy is currently saving his and Yoichi's lives at this moment. And how in the world did they get themselves into this predicament, he doesn't know, but the fact that someone is willing to risk their life to jump into the deep, lake water and drag the two of them back to land is already a conundrum on its own. That being said, Hisashi almost didn't notice how the boy didn't even break a sweat while the two white-haired brothers were choking up water and panting heavily, even if he was the one who had to save them. Actually, he was even looking bored. Detached. Hello, the boy says innocently when they've finally heaved up all the water in their throats. And it goes downhill from there. Yoichi was 11 and Hisashi was 13. He says he has a meta ability. He also said that his name is Izuku. I'll be you and your brother's tutor from now on, Izuku-sensei informs him with a quaint smile. But Hisashi doesn't tell him his name. Yet. Yoichi was naive enough to let slip not only his own name, but also their family name, so any effort would likely be useless. But that didn't mean Hisashi was going to make it any easier for him. Hisashi doesn't know what to believe. Because he knows that Izuku-sensei isn't lying. But Hisashi's meta ability, transfer as he called it, could detect meta abilities and he sees them as a sort of aura around a person. Except, he can't see any semblance of an aura around Izuku-sensei. No, it was less of a meta ability's powers radiating off of a person like the Hawking radiation than a literal black hole, where Izuku-sensei is the event horizon, and if Hisashi wasn't careful, all of his powers would be seeked away and leave the shell of who he used to be behind. Was his meta ability something like Hisashi's? To give and take? It was half of what Hisashi imagined his own aura to be. Like a black hole and a white hole, simultaneously. Except for Izuku-sensei's aura, he's not even sure if it's a meta ability at this point, is so different from everything he's seen before. Hisashi was almost afraid to touch him. It's probably a good thing that he only seemed interested in Hisashi for now, instead of his naive, weaker younger brother. But it's fine, everyone else who's approached Hisashi only seemed to want something from him anyway. But Izuku-sensei seemed different. He seemed like he had asked Hisashi to take his meta ability. So he did. But he couldn't. What? Normally, transfer didn't need the other party's permission to take their meta ability. Actually, it might have been a lot less complicated if it was as simple as permission needed, yet the moment Hisashi tried to pull Izuku-sensei's meta ability, there was nothing. And maybe this has got to do with Izuku-sensei's meta ability aura, which felt exactly like how it appeared. Like a black hole, threatening to SCK Hisashi's innards away from him, but also repelling Hisashi away. And that was when Hisashi heard it, the almost eldritch-like whisper that resonated yet seemed to not have been there at all. And Hisashi retracted his hand instantly, cradling it as if it had been torched by the bone-chilling cold that had attacked him when he pulled. And at that moment, when Hisashi fought to keep the trembles from making him crumble, when Hisashi raised his shaking frame to look up at Izuku-sensei. Izuku-sensei is completely human. Hisashi saw a god's face, encased by shadows. And then it was gone as if it had never existed. Hisashi blinks, but he's not ignorant enough to brush it off as just a trick of the light. When Izuku-sensei told him that he was immortal, Hisashi couldn't help but think that it's somewhat fitting for him. Apprehension turned into neutrality. Neutrality turned into admiration. Admiration turned into obsession. After all, how could be not? Izuku-sensei is just so wise. As he started coming over to teach Hisashi and Yoichi more, Hisashi couldn't help but grow to admire Izuku-sensei. The respect must have started with when he let Hisashi try to take his meta ability that day, but Izuku-sensei wasn't like the other adults. They were afraid of Hisashi and called him and Yoichi monsters, which is just so unfair because it's not his fault for being born with different genes. And they had to drag his sweet little brother into it as well. Izuku-sensei never looked at them differently. Hisashi's pretty sure that his parents didn't pay for Izuku-sensei to teach them, but sensei had shrugged when he asked and the urge to ask subsided. Plus, aside from tutoring them on advanced subjects outside of school, the two siblings are always topping the class with Izuku's help. Izuku-sensei also came to hang out once in a while, or take them outside. Hisashi felt that their biological parents didn't really care about them and the siblings have never had a happy childhood, but Izuku-sensei was almost like an elder brother figure to them. It's not just that either. Izuku-sensei also protected them on multiple occasions. He was always there for them when any one of them needed consolation. Despite always appearing detached and blank, Izuku-sensei was surprisingly compassionate and kind. Izuku-sensei is very intelligent, too. And wise. It must be the experience accumulated over the dozen decades that Izuku-sensei had lived. Hisashi has never met anyone even half as old as Izuku-sensei claimed to be, but maybe that's just because they weren't allowed to meet that many people anyway. Hisashi stared down at the group of armed officers aiming guns at a few individuals down on the street. He and Izuku-sensei, Yoichi was sick again, it was a shame, were currently hidden on one of the high-rise building blocks, behind the windows of the highest floor. The perfect place to observe and prevent others from seeing them. And those few individuals had meta abilities. Just like him and Izuku-san. It's not like Hisashi has never seen another person with meta abilities, other than Izuku, quite the opposite, actually. He actively sought them out at one point, and after they've heard about his abilities, some would plead for him to take theirs way, which Hisashi happily obliged to because meta abilities were all so fascinating, and some would avoid him, probably because they're afraid. It makes Hisashi wonder, sometimes, how Izuku-sensei managed to stay in the dark for this long, more than 100 years before Hisashi was even born. Izuku-sensei was the true first meta ability haver. And yet he was so good at masking himself and blending into the background. Hisashi shook his head to focus on the gruesome, unfair scene unfolding beneath. If he used the internal binocular meta ability that he got some time ago, he could make out the posters and flyers pasted on the street walls and flying around the commotion. Posters of "Get rid of the freaks" and meta abilities are a disease. Hisashi looked away to Izuku-sensei, unwilling to read any further. Sensei's face had a neutral expression, as always unflappable and comforting, yet something deeply unsettling. He brushes that away. What do we do? Sensei shook his head and placed a hand on his shoulders. The touch was gentle and light, but it grounded him. However, not even this curbed the white-hot anger that flared up inside of him for the unjust treatment towards the meta abilities users. It's not even their fault. When have humans become this stupid? But maybe it was in their nature, it's either fight or flight. And it was both. They were so scared that at this point they've stopped running, not that they even needed to. Meta ability users don't have any bad intent and decided to lash out instead. It's not their fault that they had that extra chromosome strand. It's a universal rule. If you don't hurt the other, they won't hurt you. So simple, and yet they failed to understand. Hisashi needed to do something about it. There must be some way that he could help, right? Let's go, Izuku-sensei says somberly. Hisashi reluctantly followed his mentor. If he could change something, anything, he'd gladly be the martyr, the savior that they need. And he'd protect them, just as Izuku-sensei did for him and Yoichi. Hisashi is 17 and Yoichi is 15. The Shigaraki brothers have long outgrown Izuku-san already, as seen from the fine product of their teasing. He thought it was time to bring it up, finally. The ideal that's been fermenting inside for the past few years. Yet still. Hisashi-kun, Izuku-san says, so you're implying that you want to become a savior of society. Hisashi tilts his head. He can't breathe properly. Why? What about Izuku-san that? I want to be a hero for the meta-ability users, Hisashi says. This, the government is corrupt and the hierarchy is crumbling. I have to. No, Hisashi, Izuku-san cuts him off with a cold look and ice creeps up Hisashi's veins. Even when Hisashi has a dozen centimeters on Izuku-san, he seemed to loom over the younger god. Izuku-san looks too old for his face and it's unsettling. You don't have to do anything. You don't want to be a hero. You want to take. You want to bring change and you probably could, but you can't be a hero. Hisashi is listening. But he doesn't comprehend. What? Why doesn't Izuku-san believe in him? He's been training hard under Izuku-san for the past few months even when Yoichi declined. He's always shared Hisashi's sentiments on society. He's always supported him. What's with the change? If you saw someone who's drowning, you'd call a life preserver but you'd never jump in to save them yourself. If you saw a heartbroken person crying, you'd pat them on the back and sympathize, yet you'd never waste yourself away to help. Izuku says, but he's not looking at Hisashi and Hisashi can't understand. It's not really bad. You're more gray, per se. A textbook hero would have presented their own heart to them on a silver platter. The essence of selfless heroism. Izuku turned to Hisashi. With your nature, both meta-ability-wise and person-wise, I don't want you to become the hero of the story. Izuku-san had a completely blank, detached look in his eyes while saying that, and if Hisashi had been calmer instead of focusing on the storm congregating inside him, he would have seen how Izuku was saying it to remind himself, too. But it's fine. It was not fine. He can't be the hero. Neither a martyr and much less a savior. But he has to bring change somehow. Hisashi laughs out loud at the empty wall in front of him. There's nothing comedic about this entire situation at all. But he had to help, somehow. Some way or another. There's got to be a solution, where he could bring change. Where people could be happy, where he and Yoichi could be safe. By the time Izuku-sensei finally left, after 7 long years of aiding the two brothers finally turned on Hisashi, he had long since cemented a plan for his course of villainy without Izuku. Hisashi spent a long time mulling over his words. He decides that Izuku-sensei is right, because he's always right, and he probably shouldn't have gotten mad. But that didn't mean that he couldn't use other methods. Maybe they're a little less orthodox. But whatever it takes, he will do it. He will make society regret not taking them in, and he will make them accept. It's been 4 years since Izuku-san left. Yoichi is growing more and more restless, with every reassurance his older brother had whispered to him. Because it wasn't fine, but Yoichi is weak, too weak to stop any of the madness. Deep down, he knew why Hisashi had snapped. It was because of Izuku-san, no? He was the final straw. Yoichi doesn't blame him, really. It was partially his as well. That's why he needs to stop Hisashi before it's too late. That's why he has to. And then Hisashi gave him that goddamned meta ability and threw him in that FING vault. And Yoichi laughs to no one in particular, the pitiful sound echoing inside the barren, dusted walls of the vault. It turns out that he did have a meta ability, after all. Albeit a weak and worthless one, but Yoichi would find a way to break through. Who knew Hisashi's help could be so useful? It may have been petty revenge, because there was really nothing he could fault Izuku-san for, really, but anguish was all that blinded Hisashi when he saw Karuto Bakugo. Why? How dare he? How did this man, who was nothing extraordinary, become a friend of an almost godlike man such as Izuku-san? To stand with him as equal so easily, something that Hisashi had been trying to do for a good portion of his life. Because how could he ever forget Izuku-san? But as much as he'd like to see Karuto Bakugo as just another stain on the pavement, he is someone whom Izuku-san would probably not appreciate seeing dead. So he tried to restrain himself. But, in a moment of weakness and the 5 years of anguish that's been bottling up ever since Izuku dragged him back to the reality, that day finally relinquished its hold. And the next moment, Bakugo was well and truly dead. It was silent, or maybe Hisashi's ears were deafened by the blood pumping through his veins at an inhumane speed as he stared down at the price of his catharsis. He didn't feel so angry, not anymore. Though the feeling was still there, stashed deep, deep down below, he somehow felt more tired than he had been in years, even if he had only killed one person. Or, perhaps, it was the weight of who exactly he had just killed. Hisashi no, all for one looks up from his bloodied, crimson hands to a familiar, freckled face. And then the world stopped for a second. There is only one being whose meta ability expelled this kind of aura. All for one, Izuku-san says, expression indecipherable. And all too suddenly, all for one was moved back to when he was still 13 and scrawny and naive, back when he was still craning his head to look at Izuku-san's face, back when he was almost sked into the black hole of a quirk, back when the fear of God was instilled into him for the first time. But Izuku didn't do anything. He just watched him with half-lidded eyes, and some kind of unspoken disappointment, or maybe it was melancholy, lingered between them. And all for one suddenly realized that while Izuku was more than mortal, he was also a little less than a god. The mere thought drained and also exhilarated him. So he smiled. There is a saying that psychopaths are born, while sociopaths are made. Izuku should be feeling an intense wave of guilt washing over him. He was the one who made the originally bright child into who he was today. But he found nothing because all that he could focus on at that moment was the mangled, bloodied corpse of his friend. It was a mistake. But even gods make mistakes, and the foolish people still worshipped them alike. Izuku was no martyr, no savior, and least of all was he the label that he had condemned his ex-mentee in cold blood with. It made him wonder just how Hisashi was able to worship him anyway. I think you just grew up too fast, Izuku says, voice soft but deafening over the silence. All for one doesn't look back. Of all the things Yoichi could have been killed by, he died by all for one. Quirk passed on to the task force leader whom Izuku had sheltered later on. Hisashi had been silent, and then he leveled an entire city district on the same night. A choked scream pierced the air, over the barren and rubble-filled grounds of Kamino Ward. It didn't take long for him to realize it came from his own throat. A little less than a century later, mentor and mentee stand against each other as hero and villain, just like how all things that go up must go down. It almost reminds Izuku of those pre-Quirk-era manga stories. No matter. It's funny, how we ended up here after all this time, Izuku laughs good-naturedly. All for one is not amused, but Izuku can sense the signal that Nana Shimura had sent him to tell him that she was safe. Good. I didn't know you liked to play hero now, Hisashi says. Wow, that's a lot of spite, Izuku thinks. Ultimately, Izuku couldn't think of anything to say. He opened and closed his mouth, multiple times, in the span of the few awkward moments on the ruins. It was a miracle that the supervillain was still so hyper-focused on Izuku, even after all these years. Izuku wanted so badly to just be able to say something to the person whom he had ruined. Intentionally, at that, who had also been a thorn in society's side for the entirety of this time. But what would he even say? An apology was useless if he can't find it in himself to feel the extent of his guilt as much as normal people did, nor if it was already too late to change anything and make amends. In the end, he sighed to no one in particular and left with a wave. An anticlimactic ending to what could have been the most epic fight in all of One for All's history. That didn't matter now, not anymore. Not when his dead body is still warm beneath the ashes and cinders. Not when all that Nana Shimura needed was a guiding light. Izuku was still feeling apprehensive about approaching Nana, but when Gran Torino came along, it seems that Izuku has his work cut out for him already. He just needs to watch, now. And the whole UA fiasco. With Nezu is coming along quite nicely. If what the lab reports deducted was correct, then Nezu can probably live on for another 80 years with no accidents, so it would be just fine. That's what he tells himself anyway, as something suddenly occurred to him. Yeah, actually. He has never gotten a hero license before. Hypocrisy doesn't apply if he's only doing this for all the tax benefits that the piece of plastic card can bring, right? It has barely been over half a decade before the inevitable battle between Nana Shimura, seventh holder of the most powerful quirk in the world, and All for One. The outcome was obvious. It was truly a shame that Nana would not be able to see Toshinori grow into the symbol of peace. It also made her wonder what would happen to Kataru. Despite all of the people important to her lingering on the back of her mind, the only person who walked out of the gruesome battle was All for One, no longer Hisashi Shigaraki, leaving the still warm, bleeding, and mangled body of Nana Shimura behind under the rubble. Nonetheless, as Yagi Toshinori and Gran Torino fled the scene, Toshinori vowed to one day destroy the monster that killed his beloved mentor. They would make him pay. And Toshinori trained and trained and trained until he passed out under Gran Torino, the image of his late mentor burnt into his mind. And Izuku watched, from afar. Toshinori did well, he thinks. He did end up becoming the symbol of peace, after all. Nezu finally rose to the place of the principal of UA a few years after, so good for him. Shuta's head feels fuzzy. He doesn't really remember what exactly had happened to have led him up to this predicament, but that's probably for the best because any coherent thought will probably exceed his current brain capacity. In other words, he just got into a particularly gruesome villain attack, the same villain that he was investigating during his internship nonetheless. Oh, is what he thinks, Hisashi and Oboro will surely help me take care of the cats, right? I can die peacefully then. This must be the stage of near-death where one mourns about their loved ones and things that are important to them, the part where one's life flashes before their eyes. Shoyuta grimaces at the sharp pain throbbing in his head as he struggled to recall the faces of his friends, only to find that even his thoughts are blurry as hell already. Let it not be said that he can barely see anything in this state, and his eyes are none the wiser. He tries to assess his injuries, even though that might not even be necessary then. He registers faintly a few metal beams and a tree trunk on top of his legs and torso and left arm. His face was basically clear, even though they are half-closed and blurry. He must look like sheet too. He must have dropped his capture scarf sometime just now. Shame, if only he had it, he would be able to maybe squirm out of here. Shoyuta can no longer hear the roaring and constant noises coming from the villain. His internship mentor must have called for backup, then. But that alone is quite strange, because it couldn't have been that long. This was a very desolate part of Japan, after all. And the fact that no one has come to get him also signifies that, well, there is barely anyone. Or maybe he just can't hear anymore. This would make sense since he is probably sporting a pretty bad concussion. The warmth on his face is definitely not tears. He can still somehow feel all his body parts, which he is a little grateful for since if he does get out of here alive, he won't be paralyzed. When you get out of here alive, you mean? If Shoyuta had any energy left and more space to move, he would have flinched violently. He knows that his senses are long dulled by his injuries, but for someone to sneak up on him so blatantly, even while he can still scout out the surroundings with blurry eyes. His ears seem to be fine since he can hear the stranger talking, but how did he not realize? Oh hell, this is not the time to be overthinking right now. And only now did he register the stranger's words. What? Shuta's voice came out airy and cracked at the end, but he can barely afford to be dignified at the moment. The stranger, he's a male, judging from the voice, and he somehow sounded younger than Shoyuta himself, chuckled. Yeah. And suddenly, the iron beams and tree trunk were lifted and thrown violently off of Shuta's body. He must have an enhancement quirk, Shoyuta thinks. Oh my, I'm surprised you're still alive, much less able to talk at all. These wounds are usually fatal to mortals. Oh. This stranger is very strange, Shoyuta thinks. He talks about mortals as if he is not one of them. Anyways, now that he can blink and take a close look at the stranger, he finds that, oh, he was right, the stranger was indeed a boy. One that looked younger than him, nonetheless. He had green, unruly curls, that were somehow not dampened by the rain, covering his eyes, making his form look somehow melancholic. He also had symmetrical, diamond-shaped freckles, which adds to the unadulterated look. The stranger wore a white shirt, black slacks, and an open tan duffel coat. The stranger looked very perfect. As in, he is not ruffled at all. He is not drenched despite the heavy downpour, and perfectly composed, voice even and somehow carried mirth. Also, why did he suddenly pause? Oh? Shoyuta decided to venture. As in, most heroes don't die as easily. It would have been a shame had I not gotten here sooner? Shoyuta. Well, that's a frankly disturbing revelation. He knew his name. And that he is using his given name freely. Shoyuta didn't realize that the stranger has somehow taken a first aid kit out of seemingly nowhere until he nudged Shoyuta to lay down his arm. Not that he is complaining about treatment, of course. While Shoyuta did feel like he can drop dead and fall asleep at any second, he'd rather not lose this chance at life, so he decided to make small talk, and to address his multiple concerns and satiate his curiosity. But Shoyuta Aizawa is a model student and does not have ulterior motives at all, both to keep himself sane and to stay awake because it does feel like he will never wake up again every time he blinks at all. Are you a hero? He manages to croak out and not scream in agony as the stranger pours the rubbing alcohol down his torso and limbs. He somehow didn't register his hero suit being cut off till now, which says a lot about his condition. You can hope so, no. Very strange indeed. It seems that the stranger is quite keen on being a little. Sheet. Could the stranger be a paramedic? No civilian or even heroes carry this big of a first aid box everywhere. Plus the fact that he is wearing gloves. Even though those look like the ones butlers and police often wear. And the fact that if medical help came, they would have prepared an ambulance and he would be on a stretcher now, instead of lying on the grimy forest floor, being treated by a stranger that is neither a paramedic nor a hero. And you're not a paramedic. So what are you? Shoyuta is slurring just a bit, and his head still throbs but not as much, so his concussion must not be that bad. The stranger hums absent-mindedly as he dabs extra firmly on a gash on his arm with a towel. Sharp one, you are. But do tell how you know. Ah, Shoyuta was right, this guy is avoiding questions on purpose. It's fairly simple, his brain hurts, you're carrying an unusually large but equipped first aid box. Ow. And you're wearing casual clothing, which means you probably didn't come with a medical team, since there would be an ambulance otherwise F-. Shoyuta hissed, hand flying to his right arm as the stranger pinched the wound a little too harshly, though to no avail as said stranger batted his weakened hand away. Oops. Just needed some pressure. Shoyuta could practically hear the sheet-eating grin on his face. He thinks he ought to be more thankful for the stranger, but man, he is making it difficult. My other question. A bristle. Why, you are one determined kid. I don't suggest we venture into that territory, seeing as I was magnanimous enough to not watch you die, you know. Shoyuta snorts. Yet he can't exactly find the energy in him to rebuttal, minus the fact that yes, he can be more appreciative of his gestures. Maybe. Also, Stranger-san looks younger than him, so what gives him the privilege to call him kid? Shoyuta has a feeling that the stranger is already an enigma of his own to him, and that he will undoubtedly be one of the causes for Shuta's migraines. Eventually. There. You can see this as a favor, then. I'll answer one question of yours in exchange for one of mine. Truth be told, Shoyuta had no idea what he wanted to ask the stranger. It wasn't as if he had nothing to ask, quite the opposite. He had too many questions. DMN stranger for making it so hard. Spit it out, then. The hand bandaging his legs did not pause. Even though it couldn't have been more than a second of waiting, it felt like an eternity. Maybe it was the pain or the fact that Shuta's hero senses are roaring like mad just because of the presence of this one boy. You study at UA, so? How is dear old Nezu holding up lately, playing principal? Shoyuta blew out a breath he did not know he was holding. All the questions in the world, and he wanted to ask about the most infuriating yet intelligent creature Shoyuta knows. However, it did sort of pique his interest, seeing as he brought up the principal so casually. Does he know him personally? Were they friends? That would certainly explain the eccentricity, although it physically pains Shoyuta to know that two Nezus being friends. Yuha? He's alright? I think it's impressive how he's holding up. He's eccentric as F-, though, and creepily smart, kind of like you, huh? Was left unsaid, but Shoyuta got the feeling that the stranger knew anyways. Why do you ask? Had Shoyuta been looking at the stranger's face, he would have been quite intimidated by the playful mirth that filled the stranger's eyes. But maybe that's why it's better that he doesn't. I'd never have expected you to use your chance like that, kid. The stranger patted the cut on Shuta's shin gleefully. Ah, no turning back now. Oh, no. Shoyuta just got played. He doesn't get paid enough to deal with this bullshit. Maybe it was Shuta's amazing self-control, or it was the concussion playing tricks on him, that Shoyuta very magically did not immediately pounce on the stranger and wrangle him. But then he thought that maybe this isn't that bad, this could sate some of his curiosity, because what the F did the ultimate troll Nezu have to do with this stranger? And this SDST was having too much fun, he could tell. But to answer your question. Well, it's complicated, but long story short, we are old acquaintances. He does have a very quaint teaching style. Oh. Not friends, just acquaintances. Shoyuta can live with that. It was only when the stranger arranged his supplies back in the first aid box that he realized that he had finished treating him. You might need new stitches if you move your legs too much, by the way. You're here for an internship, right? Yeah, but how did you know? Shoyuta stared at the stranger's work on his arms and legs but retained the pride to not marvel at how professional they looked, and it doesn't seem like it's been so long either. Also, his phone is missing. Great. Oh, your questions are long over. I've called professional help just before I patched you up. Who does internships at this dash? The stranger gestures to the forest all around them, desolated area. You're lucky it was me who found you, kid. Somehow, Shoyuta had the feeling that the stranger didn't accidentally stumble upon his dying body, but he pushes that away instead of attempting to identify the stranger in any way. Just to realize that he was long gone. No traces he'd been here at all, except for the treated wounds on Shuta's body. Shoyuta sighed. And of course, he'd left just like how he came, no warning nor any signals. Shoyuta doesn't question it at all, and if he does keep quiet and doesn't mention anything to Nezu, nobody else has to know. It was only when Shoyuta got out of the forest did he realize that he doesn't know the stranger's name. Somewhere in UA, Nezu narrows his beady eyes. Oboro is dead. Oboro is dead. To say that Shoyuta Aizawa is not taking the death of Oboro Shirakumo well is a euphemism. Which is to say, he is currently contemplating suicide at the ledge of a skyscraper. In the dead of the night. It is stupid, he knows. It is irrational, he knows. It is all hubris, and he knows better than anyone. Logically, it is not a very good choice. If he were to succeed in killing himself, maybe countless lives will not be saved in the future. But in this hero-saturated society, what's one less light to be dimmed? He thinks of Hisashi, his other best friend. If he were to kill himself, Hisashi would be left alone. Hisashi, who plastered a smile on his face just for them, if just to show that he is still the happy-go-lucky pillar of optimism. Even if he didn't believe it himself, because Shoyuta knew him better than anyone, knew where to focus on to capture the cracks and tears seeping through. They did say, fake it till you make it, but Shoyuta doesn't know how long they can pretend until the dam breaks. They don't talk much now anyways. Shoyuta knew his mental health has always been at risk, what with the constant pedestal everyone puts him on for being one of the rare ones to transfer to heroics. And the constant reminders from his childhood when people would avoid him in fear of having their quirks erased. He considers for a second. Then 2. And 3. He knows that it would be selfish for him to jump, to burden Hisashi and the others with a mess he'd made. Hisashi would break, no doubt. Arg, why was he hesitating now? He came up here specifically to jump. He'd made the decision and mulled over it for enough the last 3 days. His shoes were already neatly arranged just a few meters behind him. There's not much left for him to do. He'd written a note stashed under his shoes too. How long has it been since he first sat down on this roof? His legs dangled dangerously down the edge. Something's wrong. Oh, Shoyuta. I was hoping to talk to you again without the risk of you dying on me, but it seems I am late. Shuta's heart stopped beating for a second. He does not react, though. Doesn't squawk, doesn't flinch and slip off the edge to his inevitable demise. Though his brow does twitch at the casual use of his given name. He doesn't move his head, but his eyes track familiar gloves resting on his right. He simply says, I apologize for you have to see me in this context. The stranger's mere presence would be enough to foil his suicide attempt. It would only be an insult to off oneself before the very person that had saved his life once. He should mark it down as twice, now. There is also the fact that the stranger seemed to be very proficient in just appearing where Shoyuta would be without a sound, and how he never leaves a trace of himself behind and is gone, swift like the wind. Was that his quirk? It would certainly explain the circumstances, his stealth. He is kind of cryptid, somehow. He finally gathers the strength to turn right and look at his savior. But wait, something's wrong here. The stranger was wearing different clothes this time, a simple white shirt and gray cardigan. The stranger also no longer had green hair. No longer green eyes. But did he really have green hair and eyes in the first place? They were in a forest the last time he'd seen the stranger. It could have been just a trick of the light. Because right now, the stranger has pitch black hair and eyes redder than blood, its shine of mirth clouded by something else entirely. Then it was just a trick of the light, then. Shoyuta allows himself a few more seconds to observe the stranger, because God knows how long it will be the next time, if he sees them again, seeing as it has been a long 6 months. The stranger is as still as the night, unmoving and calculating gaze trained harshly on through Shoyuta. There is an air of regality and eternality that came with the stranger, making him untouchable, and how can Shoyuta even dream of standing on the same stage of this otherworldly being? And his eyes. Big, round, and glassy as they are, yet too small to contain the ancient tranquility only centuries can carve to man. And yet, he doesn't look to have even changed much from their last meeting, still 15-16 looking, still the easy smile that graces his lips but not his eyes. The smile stretches wider, more ice and absent, as if he was simply playing with a cat on a string. I assure you I am not here to wax poetic about the sorry state you are in, nor will I try to persuade you in any way. So you are free to do whatever you want? Free to do whatever you want. As though he is the one to grant him the freedom of doing so. He huffs drily. Semantics. The stranger's gaze returns to the cityscape. It stays silent for a very long time until Shuta's mind is once again bombarded with the images of Oboro's blood on his costume and Hisashi's drying tears. He didn't even realize he got distracted from those during their conversation. So he breaks the ice. I've never gotten your name, he starts, cautiously. Because you never know when the other might strike, even though he's fairly sure the stranger hadn't had as much fun as he wanted to, yet. The smile returns in full force. You have not, no. Why not? Tell me your name. You're not in a very good position to make demands, kid. There it is again. He is toying with him. But Shoyuta thinks he has gotten the gist of conversing with creatures, spoken from true experience with Nezu himself. Intelligent people typically trade with information. It is time to pull out his ace, then. A question for a question. Wait, no, too many loopholes. Actually, how about we play 20 questions? To get to know each other. Oh. Very bright, I like you. Shuta's lips begin to curl upwards. I accept, only on my terms. Well, sheet. Which are? The stranger holds up a finger. 3 questions, and a second finger was added. I have the right to reject a total of 2 questions, and a third, and finally, what happens in here, stays in here. Shoyuta blinks as the stranger waggles his fingers like a prize in Shuta's face. Am I understood? On one hand, this is highly unfair to him and makes barely any sense. On the other hand, though, this might be his only chance, and he takes no bargain when it comes to the things he wants. Right. Okay. My turn first, and Shoyuta almost did a double take on the edge of a skyscraper from the sudden change in demeanor, but hey, the stranger is still a paradox to him, and they are usually sneaky and makes no sense. How does Nezu teach? He's a great teacher and lets us do a lot of practicals, but also really sarcastic and is secretly a narcissist. That fits surprisingly well with what little I remember of him. Right. What's your name? Shoyuta only just noticed the blatant loophole in his question, yet before he can rush to adjust, the stranger shushes him with a finger to his lips. That's not very specific. And no takebacks, this is the cold and harsh truth. Shoyuta has half a mind to bite his fingers off. Of course, I can't tell you my real name. But technically, I'm Akatani Mikumo. Shoyuta grinds his teeth in frustration. That's definitely a fake name, but he'll salvage what he can from that. Okay, then. My turn. What's your favorite coffee? What? But then again, this may just as well be the most normal thing he could have ever gotten from the STR no, Akatani Mikumo, because nothing is really typical of him anyways. He doesn't even bother questioning how he knew that he liked coffee. Black with 2 teaspoons of sugar. Akatani hisses as if disgusted by the mere thought. How the boy can just change from an all-knowing, omniscient being to this frankly childish and immature act is alarming still. You are truly a force of nature, Shoyuta. Go off. What is your occupation? And the heavy blanket of tension fell upon the rapidly blurring night again. Shoyuta is a great mood killer when he needs to be. But Akatani only smiles brightly. Sorry, access denied. You need to be on friend level 5 to know that. Oh, what the actual sweet F dash. Big shocker. Shoyuta is absolutely floored. He thinks he might get jaded by this conversation and this conversation alone, as if he wasn't enough already. But Shoyuta, with all the gracefulness of a teenager who almost tried to attempt suicide, took it with stride. Okay. Which seems to please Akatani even more. Very well. Now we come to our last question. Shuta's stomach drops and he winces, because the number of times this boy has made Shuta's insides do backflips in just a night is both concerning and a feat in itself. Have you ever heard of someone who goes by all for one? Shuta's breath catches in his throat. The name is familiar, somehow. But what? Where did it come from? Where had he heard it? I thought it was only an urban legend? He says tentatively, just some villain story? Akatani laughs. It's a bitter, grating sound. Of course not. Well, no matter. Thank you for answering my questions. Shoyuta stays silent, and Akatani doesn't move to break it. He doesn't dare look at Akatani again through the thick, fog-like tension. Akatani, and of course, that's not even his real name, and he is once again reminded that he knows next to nothing about the entity. He's not even sure of what to classify him as now. Akatani swings his legs more freely now, and Shoyuta is afraid. Of what, exactly, he's not sure. But for many things, that he knows. And one of them is sitting to his right, at this moment. Eventually, he does cave in. Just a reminder that everything here stays here. Forget about that. Shoyuta nods, still half absent, detached. Go on, it's your turn now. The last question, you can get the last word if you wish. Who killed Shirakumo? Akatani looks at him warily. I? Shoyuta thinks about it for a moment while Akatani hesitates. And then something snaps inside his head. It made sense, somehow. It's got to do with this all for one, right? Shoyuta pressed, why did he? You heard what I said. He is just an urban legend, and I was merely trying to catch up with modern time stories. Akatani smiles without warmth. I am sorry. I have to leave now. Get home safely, alright? And then he was gone. Instead of the suicide note tucked under Shuta's shoes, he found a new one with a single sentence written on it. It read, "You're going to get yourself killed, Aizawa Shoyuta." Shoyuta does not tell Nezu about any of this. No doubt the rat has some plans going on already. There is a child in Mirai's office. And the green-haired, green-eyed, and freckled child is currently sitting on Mirai's perfectly clean office desk and dangling his feet, which doesn't even reach the floor. Mirari has been having an extremely headache-inducing day. God knows it's going to get worse. Though, nothing prepared him for when the child opened his mouth to speak. "Hello, sir," the child greets with a tentative smile as if he is merely discussing the weather. And maybe they were, because he may as well be a nightmare hallucination for Mirai. I thought I'd let you know all for one's current location. Seeing as you're All Might's sidekick and all. I'm sorry, Mirai says because he is still not processing the current situation at hand. What? The child, who doesn't look like one at all, behind his innocent, wobbly smile and youth lining his face, there is a pair of ancient eyes, too old for this facade and so out of place, had the audacity to blink in confusion. Oh, I must have not phrased that correctly. I mean to say that I have a tip for the location of All for One. And maybe it was because Mirai's brain is so plagued by the sheer amount of caffeine that's been consumed in the last week during the investigation of a possible appearance of the said villain, he doesn't question anything. Doesn't question how he got into the Child 15 secret, one that All Might has been guarding for 3 decades. Mirai just let him talk, let him lay out meticulously made, attentive to detail floor plans and maps and national secret-worthy documents out. And then he put down his mug, full of cooled, untouched black coffee, because this breakthrough was more than enough caffeine to keep Mirai awake for weeks, and really looked at the green-haired enigma. Who are you? He settles on these questions with an uncertain voice, out of all. Why are you doing this? It's extremely dangerous. And why didn't you go to All Might himself if it's so urgent? I'm just a sidekick. The child stares at him for a long time. Mirai can't read the expression in his eyes, the only truth in this blank, poker face. Pity? No, melancholy? I know. And I don't think I could face him if I tried, he says softly. This is only a part of the debt unpaid. And if he doesn't succeed, then I will have to continue carrying out fulfilling this debt for a very, very long time. Even if it kills me. Mirai stares dumbly as the boy struts out of his office, the door creating a reverberating sound when it closed behind him. In hindsight, he really should have stopped the boy when he could. Maybe it was his caffeine-addled brain's inability to function correctly, or that he clung onto the hope that he could just identify the boy through the security cameras, onto to find all of them gone for that day. But as he approached the conference room with All Might add Gran Torino in it, he couldn't help but feel a sick sense of anticipation. With the number of details and trails that the kid had provided, they might finally be able to end the case, one and for all. I can't believe that you would sell me out like this, sensei. Izuku's guts churn and his mouth goes numb at the familiar voice. He doesn't think. He just saw Toshinori's shaking from, dripping with fresh, scarlet blood, and rushed in. The man didn't even see him, because the moment he whipped his head around to search for any outsiders on the sight scene, All for One ripped his guts out with the ferocity of a beast-like monster. He fled, like the coward he was and still is. From Hisashi. From a war that can never be won nor ever end. From a debt stemmed so deep it may never be paid, and the anguish so grand the cracks in the plateau will never be bridged. And it was Izuku's fault. Everything always comes to this in the end. This is the 3rd time that Izuku has used his real name. Oh, well. His name is pretty common, so it's fine. Better than Akatani Mikumo, anyways. However, nothing would prepare him for seeing the nameplate beside his house on his neighbor's front gate. Bakugo? Seriously? Are you f***ing kidding me? Well, of course, the Bakugas still occupied the family house from Katsumi's days. Izuku is secretly glad that the public still thinks that the late pro-hero Kaiser was the one who actually founded UA. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if All for One were to go for them too. It is also quite unlucky for Izuku that Mitsuki Bakugo is very extroverted. This is proven by the typical aggressive knocking that only a member of the Bakugo family can initiate. Izuku looks up from his files and sighs the longest sigh known to men because only someone who doesn't need to breath and sigh that deeply. He opens the door carefully and it almost slams into his face as Bakugo Mitsuki opens it further, aggressively. Hello, Izuku says awkwardly. Mitsuki's smile is blinding like the sun. Though, this is not the case for her husband and son waiting behind her. The husband smiling meekly while the son, a perfect male replica of Mitsuki, is scowling like everything owed him money. Why, hello there, Midoriya-kun. We're your neighbors. I'm Bakugo Mitsuki, this is my husband, Masaru, and my son, Katsuki. Katsuki chid from behind him and Masaru squirmed in his place. Ah, so that's how it is. Already Izuku can see the hierarchy in this particular family. I'm, Midoriya Izuku. Pleased to meet you. Izuku manages a shaky smile. Izuku doesn't know why he phrased that like a question, but it must have been the Bakuga's presence throwing him off. Somehow, they always manage to do that. Scratch that, all human interaction manages to throw him off. But it's fine. Mitsuki produces an orange, warm-looking box and then proceeds to practically shove it into his hands. Have you eaten yet? You must be quite tired from moving in. We packed a dinner for you. Izuku accepts the bento box shakily and shuffles aside. Thank you. And please, come in. Arg, what a social butterfly. Izuku's literally a war veteran. After a few more minutes of enthusiastic conversations on Mitsuki's part and awkward replies from Izuku, the group finally settled in the living room with a cup of tea for each of them. Mitsuki clears her throat first. So, Izuku-kun, where are your guardians? Izuku smiles wryly. He's been waiting for this question, and it's great because he had a script for when people would inevitably ask him that. They're working overseas, and since their work requires them to travel a lot, I had to settle here by myself. When he saw their blank expressions and Mitsuki's surprised face, he quickly corrected himself. But it's fine. I'm happy to settle down, anyway, so, I'm pretty independent, so it's fine. Ahaha. Masaru raises an eyebrow. Izuku flashes him his brightest smile. What difficult brats. Well, how old are you, the Izuku-kun? Mitsuki comments, you barely look 13, I'm not gonna lie. I'm sorry, what? I'm 15, actually. And I'm going to be homeschooled until high school next year. Oh. That's great. You're the same age as my Katsuki. You're such a polite boy, I'm sure you'll get along just fine. The boy in question practically explodes. What the F, do you mean, old hag? I ain't getting along with this fucking loser. Izuku hides his snort by faking a cough. Masaru winces and Mitsuki practically detonates as well. What did you say, you fucking brat? Language. And be nice to Izuku-kun. This is why you have no friends. Ha. I've got plenty extras following me around, you hag. Dear, Masaru attempts to defuse the situation and a wave of sympathy washes over Izuku. It seems like Katsuki has an ego problem, too. Superiority complex? It's fine. Really. Izuku says, scratching the back of his head, which school do you go to, anyways, Katsuki? This seemed to ground the blonde boy. Alder Junior High. It's a really fucking shitty school, and I'll be the only one to make it into UA from there. If this was an anime, Izuku's sure that he and Masaru would have been comically sweat-dropping. That's great. Me too. Mitsuki, who has been watching their interaction with something akin to fondness, suddenly facepalms in exasperation. Which is completely justified, because Katsuki explodes, again. What do you mean, you fucking Deku? Yuri just dash. Deku? I. And then, Mitsuki proceeds to smack him on the shoulders, making the boy visibly seethe. I apologize for his horrible social ability, Izuku-kun. He really needs anger management therapy dash. I ain't weak, you fucking hag. Oh, dear, it's really a superiority complex. But, yes, he does want to become a hero. Which is why we're trying to work on that. And then, she checks her wristwatch. Izuku does too, and realizes that it's almost 9 p.m., and that the Bakugas have been here for more than an hour already. Oh, my. It's so late already. I'm so sorry for imposing for so long. There's school tomorrow, so we'd better get home now. Izuku nods easily as he stands up along with them. It's fine, Mitsuki-san. You can drop by any time. Have a good night. They wave to him at the doorway. See you. Izuku watches as they banter on the way back home. A wave of foreign, unwanted nostalgia suddenly overcomes him and Izuku suddenly remembers the green of his own mother's hair. But he has no use for that, now. He has forgotten her voice a century and a half ago, and he wants it to stay that way. Missing people is not for people like him. Not for him, because there's quite possibly no one else like him. Except now there is, and All for One is currently on the hunt for One for All, which is currently wielded by the number one hero, All Might, who is also coincidentally the only One for All user to critically injure All for One. But maybe it's because the stockpile grew stronger. Either way, Izuku still feels incredibly bad for what he did back then. That's a lie. He hasn't felt that guilty, not in centuries. But it's fine, he thinks, as he turns off the lights and stares at his cooling tea in the dark of the house. The surface is luminescent green, and it ripples slightly despite there being no light, nor wind. Izuku narrows his eyes at it and goes to the kitchen, pouring the cold tea out and washed the mug. He then went to the roof and stared up at the moon, because apparently, this is what people do when they miss others. Deku. Well, that's new. God. Katsuki looked so similar to Karuto, it's driving me insane. Katsuki awoke in the dead of the night with cold sweat and a headache. When he looked out the window, though, he was greeted with the house of that fucking extra Deku the old hag had forced him to go meet. And it turns out that he wants to go to UA too. Fat chance. And the figure of said extra on the roof. Katsuki can't even describe why, or what it's about, but somehow seeing that extra made his hair stand on his neck. Like he's a threat. Which he very obviously is not. Because if he is, then Katsuki will just blast him dead. Yeah, no one can stand a chance with him. He's going to be the greatest, strongest hero, after all. Katsuki narrows his eyes at the window and pulled up the curtains, before finally trying to sleep again. Unbeknownst to him, the weird dreams that have been plaguing Bakugo Katsuki since he was a toddler are only coming back in full force because of Midoriya Izuku. Not that he remembers much of its contents, anyways. Plus, Izuku's quirk is only immortality. It won't do much more than that, much less be related to the voices constantly clamoring inside of his head, not sparing him a single moment of peace. Probably. It was a horrible, horrible idea to do this, but now that Izuku's here, he couldn't back down. In order to create a cleaner, better identity, Izuku had to utilize all his methods. And that included actually going to a middle school before UA. It would probably be fine since there is still a year or so left, but since he had just blatantly told the Bakugas that he was going to get homeschooled before high school, it would definitely be suspicious if he were to attend Aldera, which is Katsuki's middle school. So he needed to pick another school. Well, this would probably be easy. Mizudafu was a fairly large city, and naturally had more close middle schools. If the Bakugas were to ever ask about why he is going out, he could just tell them that it was tuition or extracurricular classes. This should better work, Izuku thought as he sent out a transfer application to Nabu Middle School. The term ends next week, and his supposed third year begins in 2 months, so that should give him enough time to prepare. Actually, it turns out that Izuku is woefully unprepared because 2 months flew by in an instant, for him at least, and now he is currently standing in front of his new classroom, wearing the button-up, tie, and blazer of the Nabu school uniform, hunched back as the teacher asks him to introduce himself. Class, this is Midoriya Izuku, a new transfer student, Teruhashi-sensei says. Midoriya-kun, would you like to introduce yourself? Some part of Izuku's brain wants to say no, I don't want to introduce myself, but the more logical part implored him to play along with the suffering. I'm Midoriya Izuku. My parents travel for work a lot and now that I can finally live alone, I am settling down in Japan. That's it, I think. Izuku almost wants to pat himself on the back for that splendiferous and eloquent introduction when some students called out, "What's your quirk?" So Japan is still a little quirkist. Well, it's called healing. And it's really boring, it's exactly like its name, so, yeah. Heal yourself or the others, a girl with blue hair who sat in the first row asked, how fast can you heal? Izuku just shrugged. The class seemed to dampen at that, and Teruhashi-sensei patted him on that back and sent him to his seat. Izuku saw that he sat beside a tall, lanky boy with purple gravity-defying hair who looked like he needed a lot of sleep. Hello, Izuku said, trying to be polite, what's your name? Teruhashi-sensei seemed to have caught that, because she then smiled and said, Shinso-kun, since you are sitting next to Midoriya-kun, you should be his school guide for the first week or two and help him familiarize with the school. If Shinso had any less filter, Izuku was sure that he would have groaned out loud. However, he just rolled his eyes and nodded. Izuku flashed him the most friendly smile he could muster. So, what's your name? Shinso Hitoshi, he grunts. It was a little awkward, so Izuku dug his hands into his bag and fished for the timetable, and frowned. Hitoshi-kun, I didn't bring my class schedule today. What's our next class? And then he realized that, normal teenagers don't refer to their school peers whom they're only met for a few minutes by their first names in such a familiar or senile manner. This is proven to be correct as Shinso turned and stared at him with a mix of incredulity and hostility. Can you not call me by my given dash, he began, and then abruptly cut himself off just before he finished the question. He's not stuttering, but he has trouble talking in long sentences, or asking questions. Never mind. We have maths next. Izuku gave him a thumbs up. Sorry. I'm just too used to calling people in a casual way since we usually use given names in Europe. Thanks. Shinsu's eyebrows unfurrowed. Oh, that makes sense. Izuku tuned out for the entirety of maths. He didn't forget everything that he's learned, after all. What's the next class? Izuku asks as he slides into the seat opposite Shinsu's during lunch with a can of espresso in hand. It's a self-study PRD, Shinso says, but Teruhashi-sensei is going to use this PRD for career counseling this year, and so on. Oh, Izuku raises an eyebrow, what high school do you want to go to, then, Hitoshi-kun? Shinso stopped chewing in his food and slowly raised his head. I shouldn't tell you. You're only going to tell the others and then I'll be ostracized all over again. So is this a case of bullying? But what does his choice of schools have to do with this? Unless. And then Shinso stood up and took his plate. Lunch is ending soon. You should hurry up. Well, maybe I could ask him after school? During the counseling PRD, Teruhashi-sensei handed down a piece of paper for everyone to write their top 3 choices of high school down. Izuku didn't want to stand out too much, but after sneaking a glance at Fukushima and Sango's papers in front, it seemed that aiming for UA, no matter which course, was a popular choice amongst his classmates. This meant that Izuku didn't have to worry about being too ambitious, right? Speaking of which, he doesn't know everyone's quirks yet. Should he hack into the school database? Or steal the files from the archive office? Or maybe he could just ask like a normal person, but he doesn't want to do that. Izuku put UA as his first choice, Shiketsu as his second, and Hiratsu's School of Maths and Science as his third. He had no intention of going to Shikatsu or Hiratsu, even though Shiketsu was also a well-known hero school and Hiratsu offered a variety of support courses. Well, it's mostly because he wanted to see Nezu and All Might, but he had a feeling that UA is going to be fun. As Teruhashi-sensei came to collect their papers, Izuku tried to sneak a glance at Shinso's, only to realize that he's flipped it to the blank side already. But, oh well. Alright, class, Teruhashi-sensei says when she went back to the front of the classroom, this is just your first selection. You can change your mind anytime before the final paperwork goes through at the end of this year. Izuku turned to look at Shinso, only to see something dark clouding his face. Anger? Well, no matter. As the last bell rang, Izuku packed his bag and prepared to go home. There wasn't any reason to be so worried about some teenager, anyways. But wait. Actually, it turned out that there is, because the moment Izuku stepped out of the classroom, along with a majority of his classmates, too, he realized that Shinso didn't leave along with them. There weren't any after-school activities or consultations. Even though there was no reason for Izuku to worry, he still felt something off. So he turned around and walked back to the classroom. Izuku says into the almost empty classroom, except for a few people, some black-haired guy named Yotatsu and two of his friends, and Shinso. The scene didn't seem like a friendly one, what with Yotatsu staring eye to eye with Shinso, probably glaring at each other and arguing about something before Izuku came in. They turned to Izuku. "The F are you doing here?" Yotatsu snarls. Izuku blinks, and then realizes how he must have looked like to an outsider, a skinny, baby-faced kid with two big eyes and freckles, along with noodle arms and being short as F-. But, well, sometimes it makes his opponents underestimate him too much. "I just forgot something," Izuku smiles innocently, "what are you guys doing?" One of Yotatsu's friends, Kanano, snorts, and jabs a thumb at Shinso's direction. "This future villain has the gals to want to become a hero. Can't you see how ridiculous this is? You're still new, so of course, you didn't know. Honestly, I feel bad for you, man." The other one, Ruji, laughs. "You're getting stuck with him for your first week here." Izuku raises an eyebrow and crosses his arms nonchalantly. "Huh? Care to elaborate?" "Huh. Obviously, he didn't tell you what his quirk is," Yotatsu sneers. "So apparently Japan is a little worse, no, still very bad on the quirk discrimination part. Especially this generation, huh? He can brainwash you and make you do anything if he asks you a question. That's just paving his way to becoming a villain." That was so ridiculous that Izuku would have laughed, had he not had a filter. "Right. Well, I have some business with Hitoshi-kun, too, so you should, perhaps, leave us alone." Izuku tilts his head at them when they freeze and is glad that this intimidation tactic still works with this face. Or perhaps they didn't want to mess with the new guy too much, who knows. Izuku smiles pleasantly at them as the three exits the classroom with glares on their faces. "What are you?" "I didn't need your help," Shinso says. So Izuku hit the jackpot on him not wanting to ask questions directly. But a mental mind control quirk? Izuku can work with that. "Well, aren't you a little ungrateful now?" Izuku says, turning to him with a smile. "Hey, Hitoshi-kun. If you really do want to get into UA's hero course, you'd better train both your quirk and your body." Shinso looks taken aback at that, and then a little affronted. "My quirk? Do you want even more people to think that I'm a villain? For illegal quirk usage?" And then, quieter, "And I'm running every day, so, yeah." Izuku smiles even wider. "Good. You're actually comfortable enough to ask questions now. Glad to know that I have such a soothing presence." Shinso's eyes snapped open wide. "You're really more shameless than you look, Midoriya. I hate to break it to you, but no one would voluntarily become a victim of my quirk. You can start by asking me more questions," Izuku says, "because I can help you. Train your quirk and working out, I mean. And you should really stop thinking of the people that you use your quirk on victims, Hitoshi-kun. You're not gonna go around thinking that villains are your victims too." You would help me?" Shinso asked. "And train me? I think you should train yourself first." Izuku rolls his eyes. "I just look lean. It's the surprise factor. And, obviously, UA favors physical quirks in the entrance exam, and the only one who's ever transferred to the hero course from general education is Eraserhead, and you obviously don't want to do that if you want to use your quirk in hero work because then people will see all your tells on national television and… I'm rambling again, aren't I? Shinso blinked back at him. No, it's fine. I'm just not used to it. People talking to me. Izuku turns to the classroom door. Well, you can start by telling me about your quirk. I know somewhere private where you can train. You can't be serious, Hitoshi says. There was no way that Midoriya would be asking me to clean this trash yard. It doesn't even remotely resemble a beach, side for the water. I'm not, Midoriya assured him. Honestly, Hitoshi thinks that he ought to be grateful for Midoriya since he was the one who offered to help Hitoshi. However, if he was going to make Hitoshi come to this stinky beach every day, then his rights are revoked in Hitoshi's books. Truth be told, Midoriya was still somewhat of an enigma to Hitoshi. He barely knew anything about the guy other than his basic information, name, quirk name, some backstory that he had told the whole class. Yet, he felt so transparent next to Midoriya, it was as if Midoriya could literally see through him. Especially when he dissected him with a stare. However, the boy was also ordinary looking enough to pass off as just another face on the street, if not for his presence. Oh, yeah, Midoriya snapped his fingers, and also to awaken Hitoshi from his trance, you haven't told me the mechanisms of your quirk yet. Hitoshi says, it's called brainwashing. My quirk allows me to put someone in a state where they are forced to obey whatever I command. I can only activate this power when my target verbally responds to something I say. Brainwashing needs to be intentionally activated and will not take effect if I don't want it to. Midoriya nodded. I'm going to assume you can't make the victim perform complicated tasks that require their memory, or something like that. How did you know? Hitoshi blanched. Was Midoriya a psychic or something? Just simple quirk theory, Midoriya smiles. Unless you have a quirk specifically for it, one typically can't access another's memories, much less command them to perform intelligent functions. But we're not here to talk science today. Oh, right, Hitoshi says, but what about your own quirk? Midoriya's eye twitched. I already explained just now, but fine. I think you'll get the idea better if I just… And then Midoriya bent down to pick up a sharp glass shard off of the dirty sand, and proceeded to stab himself in the forearm. Hitoshi blinked and then processed what had just happened. What the F dash? He says and took a handkerchief out of his pocket, do you dash? He never got to finish his sentence, because he could only stare at the bleeding, deep laceration that would have been infected in no time had it not been closing up. Hitoshi felt sick, but he couldn't take his eyes off of the red flesh. The blood was still there, but by the time he blinked again, it was gone. The red was still there, vibrant blood dripping down onto the trash and sand and staining the white dress shirt red. It doesn't even leave a scar, Midoriya, the madman, continues, lacerations like this is nothing. My pain receptors are numbed, which is probably a safety precaution against getting addicted to faux dying. It's quite interesting, and all the other healing quirks that I've seen never heal as fast and as well as this without any backlash. Apparently, my limbs regrow, as well. Midoriya turned back to Shinso as he shook his bleeding arm, which was now clean and not scarred. Hitoshi-kun? You, Hitoshi says, are crazy. You're mental. The shorter boy just shrugs and grins at him like the sick predator that he was. Obviously. Now, Hitoshi-kun, we should be training your quirk now, don't you think? Hitoshi gulped and wrung his hands around a little. Yeah, if you're okay, I guess. So do I just use my quirk on you? Yes, Midoriya decides, do it now. And Hitoshi felt the invisible string, waiting for him to create the connection between his and Midoriya's brain. He felt his quirk fixing itself around Midoriya's frontal cortex, and then the back lobe. And then, he commanded, put both of your hands up. And he should have obeyed, eyes glazed over, because no one has ever slipped out of Hitoshi's control before unless they are hit by a force of some sort. Not this one, though. Because as Hitoshi tried to tug on the invisible strings linked to Midoriya's brain, there was something so difficult about it, and whenever he approached getting it through, something tingled in his own brain and jolted the string back to where it was before. And then, as if it had never been there before, the string snapped and broke like a thin strip of glass, and Hitoshi is suddenly blinking at a bored-looking, and most importantly, clear-eyed Midoriya in front of him. Did you hear anything? Midoriya asked with a tilt of his head, which would have looked innocent to anyone had Hitoshi not seen the very same boy stab himself a few minutes ago. Like, voices of some sorts. You knew this wouldn't have worked, Hitoshi breathes as he steadies himself. Yeah, Midoriya's voice was carefully laced with irritation and apprehension. Quirks that involve one's brains, cognitive senses, or motor controls have never worked on me. And I can't find out why. Ah, Hitoshi says. Whatever, Midoriya pried himself away from Hitoshi and climbed onto the top of the tallest mountain of trash around them. We can find someone else later. For now, you can work on cleaning the beach, and then after that, run 2 laps along it from this entrance to the northeast entrance. Hitoshi glared at him. I thought you were joking. You can't possibly dash. Yes, I did just ask that of you, Midoriya drawls as he slides one leg over the other, looking down at Hitoshi. It's the fastest way to do this in, what, 10 months until the entrance exam? Then what about you? Hitoshi rebutted. Midoriya hums. Don't worry about me. At least I know how to throw a punch. After this, I should teach you how to fight. Hitoshi gritted his teeth and refrained from groaning. It was quite weird, honestly. He seemed to have just clicked with Midoriya, like how he hadn't with anyone in, just about forever, perhaps. But he has never really had many friends since he was young. And now Midoriya's here and he finally felt as if he had a chance again. Sure, the guy's weird, and he's a little bit of a MSEST, and he's a cryptid, and he doesn't pay attention in class, but Hitoshi will take what he has for now. Plus, there's always something about Midoriya Izuku that made him want to stay. So might as well find out more about him in the process. A Sunday during the midterm holidays finds Bakugo Mitsuki on Izuku's doorstep ringing the bell. Ah, Izuku opens the door to the smiling woman. What do I owe you the pleasure to today? Mitsuki smiles. Would you like to have dinner with us today? Izuku says as he followed Mitsuki into the Bakugo household. It was significantly more furnished than Izuku's minimalistic house, or rather, squeaky clean white walls with no signs of the personality of the house's occupant at all. The Bakugo's walls were filled with photos of Mitsuki and Masaru, and even more photos from after Katsuki was born. Looking at it almost made Izuku jealous. He barely remembers what having a family is like. But, perhaps, he didn't even deserve one in the first place. Make yourself at home. Mitsuki laughs, gesturing to the dining room where Katsuki and Masaru were sitting opposite each other. Masaru smiles timidly at him. You can sit next to Katsuki. Ha? Said Blonde exploded, you never told me you were bringing this FING extra? You ungrateful brat. Mitsuki snarls back, be my fucking guest, will you? Meanwhile, Izuku has already settled beside Katsuki, making the blonde startle, tiny sparks starting to fly off of his hands. Oh, hello, Katsuki-kun, Izuku says solemnly with a pleasant smile, how nice to see you again. The F, you on? Katsuki seethes, don't tell me you're still going on about that UA sheet, Deku. I bet you have some weak but quirk. How can you even dream to compete with me? Me going to UA has nothing to do with you, though, Izuku says. He has enough experience with the rest of the Bakugas, who are just as stubborn and temperamental and occasionally, unreasonable like this. It would almost be endearing. Plus, there's no such thing as a weak quirk. Every quirk can be utilized in a unique way to the user's advantage. Why re you so fucking sappy? Katsuki barks, I have a powerful quirk that I can and will use to become the #1 hero. Explosions, right? Izuku tilts his head. Masaru looks between them nervously. Izuku didn't even need to pull up their files to know what Mitsuki and Katsuki's quirks were. If he needed to take a wild FING guess, then Katsuki either secreted nitroglycerin or propane and used them to create explosions on impact or heat. Your tears, or sweat, contain probably either nitroglycerin or something similar to its composition. Am I correct? Masaru blinked at him in shock, and Katsuki was no better before his face twisted back into a snarl. How the F did you, oh? You're cheating with a fucking analysis quirk. Izuku almost wanted to rub at his temples but decided to shed some pity upon their dining room. No, I don't. I actually have an instant healing quirk. Glad to know my intellect competes with a professional analyst's from you, though. It was probably the dining table's one saving grace that Bakugo Mitsuki walked in with a pot full of steaming curry right at that moment, else Katsuki would probably have bombed even Izuku to a state of no return. You dash. Katsuki! Mitsuki screeches as she slams down the curry onto the table. It was a miracle that none spilled out, and Izuku tried to send some sympathy to Masaru through telepathy as they watched the mother and sons bantering. Be polite. The rest of the meal went rather smoothly if they were going for the Bakuga's standards. Maybe Izuku's low volatility, paired with an even lower Masaru's, balanced out the increasing high ones of Mitsuki and Katsuki. Just before Izuku left, however, Katsuki cornered him at the doorway. I'm going to bomb through the entrance exam, Katsuki says, and I'll beat your butt. Sure, Izuku says, and then grins and flips him off before running for the dear life that clings onto him too much, explosions detonating behind him. You dash, Hitoshi's eye twitched as he exclaimed, are you a FING genius? Aren't you a delinquent who doesn't do your homework, ever? You don't even have a FING intelligence quirk. Dangling in front of him was Midoriya's results of their finals, and the guy was first in the FING year. And Hitoshi doesn't get it, because he studies religiously every FING day despite the gruesome training that Midoriya had put on him, and he still only got the 13th place in the year. There were a few people with memory or intelligence quirks, and they usually took the first few spots, but Midoriya? His friend whose quirk has nothing to do with intelligence? Who never turns in homework and lounges around and does who knows what all day? Who never even remotely pays attention in classes and writes in his quirk analysis journals all the time? Well, he guesses he still manages to answer every single question correctly when teachers got annoyed enough to call on him during class. And every time the school tries to contact his parents, they're always abroad. Ah, you think so too? Midoriya grins at him cheekily. Not everything's got to do with quirks, you know. I might just be more intelligent. Haha. Hitoshi rolls his eyes. However, he does actually know that Midoriya is far smarter than a regular teenager, and good at just about anything. In the last 9 months that he's been at this school, multiple clubs have asked if he was interested because he apparently drew a really nice painting during art, or ran first for long distance, or is way too flexible, or speaks English and Chinese perfectly. Hitoshi even once heard a few of their classmates talking about Midoriya's looks, which they called cute. However, despite all this, Midoriya somehow still managed to remain amongst, and even fit in with the plebeians, and still stuck with Hitoshi even though there were probably far better choices of friends, Yamino, or Yotatsu, or Mirai. Thought Hitoshi knew that he should be grateful, because with Midoriya acting as a somewhat shield in between him and the rest, barely anyone tried to taunt Hitoshi anymore. Oh, and Midoriya snatches the piece of paper from Hitoshi's hands and dragging him back to reality, since you've almost finished cleaning the beach, and the entrance exam is next month. I thought I'd give you a day off. Hitoshi eyed Midoriya with surprise, and a fair amount of suspicion. What are you planning? Midoriya smirked and leaned in to whisper in Hitoshi's ear, I'm going to show you the UA entrance exam scopes. Hitoshi jolted back with wide eyes. You did what? Midoriya winks. You'll see. This seems highly illegal, Shirnu says after Izuku explained what he was going to show him on the way to the beach later on. Nah, it's fine. Izuku was about to laugh it off until he noticed a foreign figure at the beach. There's someone there. Shinso narrowed his eyes at them in suspicion, but Izuku just stalked forward casually. From behind, the stranger was a man and he had a thin, gaunt, and lanky form, making him look like a skeleton. He also had yellow-golden hair, 2 tufts of which were hanging in front of his face in an almost familiar way. Ah, All Might. Izuku smiles bitterly to himself. Shinso then caught up with him. Who's that? As Izuku contemplated his answer, Yagi Tashinori turned around. Oh, hello, there. Good evening, sir. Izuku fights to keep the tremor off of his voice as Shinso look at them with raised brows. What brings you here today? Oh, I just haven't seen this beach clean in so long. Yagi laughs, it brings back so many memories. I really want to thank the people who cleaned it these past few months. Izuku smiles as Shinso says, actually, we cleaned it, sir. Yagi's face morphed into that of surprise and then happiness. That's wonderful, young men. What made you do it? Hitoshi-kun here wanted a way to train, so I suggested. Izuku trailed off. Train for? Yagi prompted. We want to become heroes, Shinso said from beside him, scratching at the back of his neck. Izuku saw the gleam of conviction in his eyes. You young men are preparing for UA? Yagi's eyes lit up. Well, he is teaching at UA this year. Forgive my rudeness, my name is Yagi Tashinori. Izuku nods. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and this is Shinso Hitoshi, my classmate. As Shinso and Yagi continued conversing, Izuku couldn't help but sneak a glance at Yagi's torso. There was a hole there. All for one ripped his stomach out. Izuku did this. No. He couldn't be thinking about that now. Well, Yagi says at some point in the conversation when the sun is beginning to set and the clouds in the sky are a brilliant shade of purple, blue, and orange. Once again, thank you for cleaning up the beach. As you can see, Dagoba always has the most beautiful skies during sunset and an even more beautiful sunrise. He seems nice, Shinso said after Yagi had left. He is, Izuku says. You know him? Izuku blinks, realizing his slip-up. Not really, I guess. I've seen him before? He's going to be a teacher at UA, so. Oh, yeah, about that thing you were going to show me, Shinso mutters. Why, Izuku teases, is model student Shinso Hitoshi finally going to give in to the dark side and join us corrupted zygotes? Shut up, Shinso rolls his eyes. Izuku sat his laptop down on the stone brick walls at the back of the beach, motioning Shinso to come closer and see. Izuku had dug into the deep webs of the UA database and managed to find the exam layout and secret point systems, about which he had emphasized the importance of the rescue points to Shinso, as their quirks weren't exactly offensive. This, Izuku says as he points at the screen, is the 1-pointer, 2-pointer, 3-pointer, and 0-pointer, and their respective deactivation points, which are their weak points. And here is the point systems. There are 2 villain points, for destroying the robots, and rescue points. The criteria are listed below, and I think that's all. Wow, Shinso breathes, this is super rigged. Nepotism, Izuku grins in lieu of an answer. There wasn't much else to say, anyways. Although Izuku was kind of disappointed that Nezu didn't make the exam more fair. However, he also knew that the Hero Public Safety Commission is a huge thorn in every hero-related school's side, so there probably wasn't much he could have done about it. Wait, Shinso says, Rule 14 says that we can bring up to 3 weapons, or support items, as long as they are approved. They look at each other. Precisely, Izuku smiles, which is exactly why you need to learn how to throw knives. Ah, I'd rather learn how to throw wrenches, but that sounds cool too. Before Shinso could finish his sentence, though, Izuku has already fished out a small black bag out of his school bag. Come on. Pick one. Shinso dug his hand into the bag and fumbled blindly before settling on something like a pocket knife and wrench. Good choice, Izuku says, you can slice through the wires with the knife and do lots of things with just a wrench. I don't want to give you a knife, because you can't learn that fast in 1 month, so maybe a bow staff will do. A bow staff? Shinso asks, the barest hint of excitement in his voice. Izuku jabs a finger towards the direction of a small pile beside the entrance of the beach. Over there, Izuku says, I have compiled some stuff that can be used as larger melee weapons. Go and get 2 pipes, and I'll start teaching you how to get used to it so that you can handle it well when you get a better one. Just before Shinso left for the pile, he turned to Izuku with a somewhat unreadable expression. Thank you, Midoriya, he says. It was sincere. Actually, it was so sincere that Izuku had to blink and process the words because he doesn't think he's felt like this, been like this in a long time. He's not even sure if he deserved it. For helping me, when no one would. But he just smiles. Yeah. Go on, Hitoshi-kun. Something drops in Izuku. Are you sure about that? A foreign voice says to him, in his brain. You're attaching so quickly. The voice was different from the ones that Izuku usually heard, the endless clamors in his head. This one sounded less disembodied, and more real. He's heard this voice before. That night, when Izuku got home, he opened the door and saw Shimura Nana standing in his living room, still clad in that blood-stained hero costume before she died in the fight with All for One. And then the next second, she disappeared. As if she had never been here in the first place, just a figment of Izuku's imagination. A simple hallucination. But it was fine, and nothing changes. The last time Izuku taught someone, he thinks while watching Shinso adjust his posture with the bow staff, they became the worst villain to walk this earth. But maybe that was why he was trying to mentor Shinso anyways. Maybe because he just wanted to see what would be the difference between these two, both discriminated against for something in their genome, something they couldn't control. Both had their dreams crushed repeatedly, both of who had little to no emotional support. Both are somewhat luckier than the other, in some areas, though, and that was the main difference between them. Hisashi was a minority in the minority. Not only was his mentality destroyed, but he was also in physical danger due to the shootings and government measures that had gone on in those years. However, he was also luckier than Shinso because he had someone to rely on, Yoichi, while Hitoshi had no one but perhaps the internet and parents who were far too busy. The most incriminating thing that divides them had to be Izuku, though. He may have approached Shinso slightly later, but he was the main catalyst for Hisashi's declination. If only he had more compassion and more empathy, maybe then, Hisashi could have healed and stood alongside Yoichi as the first heroes. Like what Izuku is currently pushing Shinso to become, right now. Izuku couldn't help but think this is somewhat manipulative of him, to test out the effects of his interference with other people. But people are just so fascinating, and he likes to observe these theories firsthand. Knees back, Izuku looks up and says when. Shinso slacked off slightly in the moments when he'd been lost in his head. OSU, Shinso says. Izuku smiles. 1 more week, Shinso. Perhaps he should make the most of it, then. How are you? Hitoshi says, not nervous. I don't see why I should be, Midoriya says. Word of advice, first and foremost, be aware of your surroundings. That's all you need to know for now, probably. Probably? Hitoshi says, baffled, what do you mean? Midoriya flashes him a bright plastic smile and turned to walk ahead, into the massive gates of UA, which, Hitoshi might not be able to see in person if he doesn't pass the entrance exam, so he might as well make the best out of it by scrutinizing it carefully. Which turned out to be a very bad idea because the next moment, Hitoshi had tripped on seemingly nothing and the 177 centimeters of teenager promptly starts falling to his imminent doom, towards the rock-solid cement ground. Be aware of your surroundings. If Hitoshi could, he would facepalm right now. Midoriya, you a-hole. And then, Hitoshi felt a strong hand grab the back of the collar of his school uniform at the same time as a palm falling onto his back. Eh? Told you Midoriya's faux cheeky voice could be heard, before he abruptly paused and let go of his hand. The other palm left Hitoshi's back and he immediately began floating? Oh, hello, there. Hello. Hitoshi finally recovered from FING getting floated first thing walking into UA, before he heard a young, feminine voice say, "Oh, no. I'm so sorry for using my quirk on you, you just looked like you were going to hit the ground pretty bad there, here." And then Hitoshi actually fell on his butt, for good this time, and when he finished arranging his expression to be presentable, he opened his eyes, and saw Midoriya standing over him, next to a girl with short brown hair and a permanent blush on her face, presumably the owner of the voice he heard just then. "Ah," Hitoshi says. "You know, like a social butterfly." "Uraraka, you said your quirk was," Midoriya says to the brown-haired girl, Uraraka, rubbing his chin and ignoring Hitoshi. "This BSTRD. Gravity nullification? Huh? Yeah." Uraraka says, and then she finally seemed to have noticed Hitoshi as she turned her head towards him. "Oh. I'm so sorry about that dash." "It's fine," Hitoshi says, rising to his full height because it's probably the only thing that he has over the two of the midgets in front of him right now. If what Midoriya said about her quirk was correct, how hero-worthy, I mean. It turned out okay. So. "Oh, where are my manners?" Uraraka says, looking abashed. "My name is Uraraka Ochako. My quirk is gravity nullification, and I just used my quirk on you to float you because you looked like you were about to fall, hee. Shinso Hitoshi purposely left out his quirk, not like it's necessary, anyway, she only explained hers for letting him know that he didn't use her quirk on him for unsavory purposes. Thanks. For helping me dash." I don't mean to sound rude," Midoriya suddenly cuts in. Hitoshi and Uraraka turn to him, "but I think if your quirk really is gravity nullification, and not some variant of telekinesis, Hitoshi would have hit the pavement harder than usual had I not caught him. Seriously, I even told him to beware of his surroundings, because your quirk doesn't nullify the action of Hitoshi's body moving towards the center of the Earth, and instead remain in motion and maybe even faster due to the increased momentum like in space stations since astronauts don't just float around, they can move too. Hitoshi coughed into his fist as he jabbed a thumb into the general direction of the examinees, or rather, the lack of them outside the auditorium, where they were supposed to be headed in about 10 minutes. "And I'm rambling again." Midoriya finished and smiled sheepishly as he scratched his cheek with a single finger and looked towards Uraraka. "Just a small tip, though. I like to analyze quirks in my free time and I used to be obsessed with physics, haha, and we probably should go." Uraraka simply nodded with an awkward open-mouthed smile and blinked. Don't worry. It's useful information, and yeah." The trio promptly ran towards the auditorium. They were supposed to have the written exams first, which is the same for all courses except for support, who get more advanced engineering and physics STEM papers that is apparently first-year college level. Hitoshi was sorted into the same exam hall as Izuku, away from Uraraka, who is another 3 halls away, which is reasonable because they were from the same school. However, this also meant that Hitoshi would be sitting very close to some of his classmates from Nabu. Although they didn't so openly discriminate against him anymore, especially not with Midoriya beside him, Hitoshi still couldn't handle them taunting him if he doesn't get in. Which, he definitely will. Yeah. He reluctantly took off his bag with the retractable bow staff and set it down beside the wall outside the exam hall and walked in after Midoriya. But first, he needed to complete the written exams first. All was going fine, until, of course, Snipe, the pro hero, walked in and started giving them instructions on the exam. Hitoshi tried to lock eyes with Midoriya, who was sitting in front of him, but he just rolled his eyes and looked in front. And then they got the exam papers, a single, hefty stack with every subject, designed for the best of the best. So Hitoshi shuts up and starts frantically scratching with his pen on the papers. The whole exam is 3.5 hours, from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., and Hitoshi is terrified to note that students are already starting to fill out at around the 11:15 a.m. mark. He snuck a glance to Midoriya in front of him only to note with even more incredulity that, yes, he is soundly asleep. And then, however, Snipe appeared from nowhere and Hitoshi snapped his head down at his papers. He still had 7? 8? Pages left, and he couldn't afford to waste any more time. At least, it seems that most of the other examinees are in the same predicament as he is in. Out of the corner of his eye, he notes Snipe gently nudging Midoriya to wake up and submit his papers early if he was done. He is too unfairly smart. With that, Hitoshi focused on his own papers and resumed scribbling furiously. If he was going to lose, he was going to lose spectacularly. Hitoshi had finished his paper exactly 4 minutes before the end time, and one look around as he passes up his paper tells him that he actually appeared to have done quite well, compared to the examinees who were desperately writing at the last second and some who were sweating buckets. The classmates from Nabu included, of course. Hitoshi smirks at them condescendingly as they eyed him with a look of utter hate. Well, Midoriya's tutoring sure paid off. When he got outside, he notices Midoriya waving a hand to him lazily, leaning against one of the railings around the huge windows. He also notices Uraraka's bobbing, brown hair coming out of her exam hall, despite her height, or maybe, Hitoshi was just tall enough to see her. He made his way to Midoriya and realized that Midoriya wasn't actually waving to him, he was waving to Uraraka, who was running towards them before more examinees clogged the hall. Traitor, Hitoshi murmurs. Midoriya sticks his tongue out as Uraraka joined them. It was really astounding how someone who always seemed so wise and senile could be so childish. Midoriya, Shinso. Uraraka, as bubbly as ever, says. Hitoshi could never get how she is always so optimistic and energetic. The perks of not having insomnia. He's only met Uraraka for, like 3 hours, and even if she was born with such a heroic and flashy quirk, he couldn't help but like her. How was it? I think I did well in physics and Japanese literature, but I'm probably going to fail the rest, sigh. It was decent, Midoriya says, and Hitoshi knew him long enough to pick out the glee from the seemingly bored voice. I'd even call it easy. I finished an hour early, actually, history, especially. Smartass, please, bestow upon us some of your big brain intelligence, Hitoshi bemoans, feeling vindictive. Midoriya. You're so smart. Uraraka's eyes lit up. Seriously, doesn't this girl feel jealous? Midoriya is mocking people half the time, or maybe, Hitoshi is just too petty and does not understand non-petty people's mindsets. I've been meaning to ask for a while, but what are your quirks? Is Midoriya's quirk intelligence? Oh, dear. Here comes the billion-dollar question. He honestly should have expected this. No one has bothered asking him his quirk in so long, and he's been under Midoriya's protection, well, of some sorts, in Nabu for all this time, that he didn't need to worry much. However, people in Nabu were all just lower, lesser people who had weaker quirks and just normal school bullies. Uraraka was a hero hopeful, with a powerful quirk, and possibly rich for the utility of her quirk. Arg. This is what Midoriya has been trying to kick out of him these past 10 months. He should stop feeling so negative. He feels like he's even devolved, he's actually caring about other people's impressions of him, now. Before he actually didn't give a f dash. Well, not really, you don't actually need a quirk to be smart, Midoriya says. Completely ignored the question, thanks, Midoriya. Oh, we actually only have half an hour to eat lunch. So if you want energy to do the practicals later, we should probably head to the cafeteria first. And Uraraka just accepted that. Okay. Sure. And so, they went to the cafeteria, the previous quirk talk forgotten. Hitoshi sat next to Midoriya, again, in the auditorium, where Present Mike explained the rules and the objective of the Practical Hero course exam. Present Mike, wow. It's the exact same as what you told me, Hitoshi says. How in the world did you manage it? You doubted me? Midoriya says, I hacked the school database, of course. And then, a tall, bulky boy with blue hair and glasses stood up. Mr. Present Mike. You have yet to explain the last robot on the screen. He turned to Hitoshi and Midoriya, and you two over there. Yes. You with the messy green hair and the purple hair. Stop disrupting the examinees and disrespecting the hero explaining all this for us. Hitoshi blanched. What the F is this person high on? They were talking so quietly. And it is also stupid of him to assume they were purposely trying to affect the others. You dash, Hitoshi began, only to be held down by Midoriya. Sure, Midoriya says, why don't you tell that to, examinee numbers 0324 and 0325. I'm sure that you would have heard them by now, if your hearing is so sharp, Ida? Tenya? What? How did Midoriya know his name, and is that stuck-up guy from the Ingenium family legacy? The Ida 10 legacy heroes? Well, The guy Ida Tenya, because apparently Midoriya knows too much, sat down, abashed. The subsequent murmurs from the rest of the examinees were hushed by Present Mike, who started explaining the type of robot that Ida had asked for, which turned out to be the zero-pointer. Hitoshi, however, already knew this. He also knew about the secret rescue point system, which as expected was not mentioned in the slides. This feels illegal. But I am starting at a line much later than some of the others. And now, please head to your respective testing sites. Present Mike's voice startled Hitoshi, and he quickly started gathering his things to head outside. We're not in the same testing site, Midoriya says flippantly, but that's to be expected since they most likely didn't want to put people affiliated with each other together. Okay, Hitoshi says. He felt a little nervous since he was pretty used to Midoriya being a constant at his side at almost all times, but also a little excited at the prospect of finally being able to prove himself, alone. Good luck, Hitoshi, Midoriya says, you're going to need it to save Uraraka. What? Hitoshi asks, but it was too late because Midoriya had already disappeared to his testing site. Hitoshi turned his head to see, oh, Uraraka, waving to him. Well, it's not like this could go wrong. Oh. Who is he kidding? Everything is going wrong. It's been 3 minutes into the exam and Hitoshi is still running around blindly, without direction, and is late to almost every villain robot. Someone else is always taking them down first. He knows he shouldn't be reliant on other people, so it was probably a bad idea to get too attached to Midoriya. If only I didn't leave Uraraka so soon, Hitoshi thought as he narrowly avoided a piece of rubble from another robot, which he was again late to. Hitoshi clutched the bow staff in his hand and tried to recall everything Midoriya taught him. Oh, right. He had memorized the robot's blueprints. It has many weak points on the joints, though expertly concealed so that if one went about it in a brasher way, they wouldn't be able to spot it. Oh, well. Not like the people with powerful, flashy quirks need that anyway. They can just, instantly, destroy the robots. Ah. Hitoshi didn't waste any time sulking as he only had 6 minutes left. He ran towards a place with lesser people, yet robots still patrolled at. When he spotted a two-pointer standing around a mock apartment store block, he immediately ran towards its back and used his bow staff as leverage, and propelled himself upwards so that he could latch onto the still relatively short robot's shoulder. As soon as he got on, though, he realized he forgot to remember one thing: the robots can move around really fast. And then the two-pointer started flailing its arms around in an attempt to get Hitoshi off, and he almost was shaken off. But in a moment of desperation, Hitoshi raised both his arms and jammed the sharper end of the bow staff down, hard, onto the robot's upper neck, where its control panel was nested. Almost immediately, the robot froze, and Hitoshi slipped and broke his fall down to the ground before the robot could crush him beneath its body. Success? No. That's still only 2 points. But wait. There's a rescue point system. In Hitoshi's panic, he almost forgot that it existed. Oh, well. Better go now, then. There is a giant Fing robot. And it's looming over Uraraka, who was trapped under a piece of rubble. But most importantly, it's right in Fing front of him. Uraraka! Shinso shouted, wanting to help Uraraka. Because that's what a hero does, right? And also because he wants to get rescue points. And also maybe because he actually doesn't want Uraraka to die. Can you float that rubble? Well, UA's probably not gonna let a student die in the entrance exams. Surely, it would be far too immoral and would have a toll on its prestigiousness. Ah, how Hitoshi wishes Midoriya is here right now. It's as if that guy could do anything. Shinso! I'm sorry. Uraraka squeaked, sounding pained and as if she was about to throw up. I can't. Quirk overuse makes me too sick to do anything. I'm sorry. I take back anything I thought badly about you because of your quirk. That sounds like a pain. Hitoshi says, and then he is suddenly acutely aware of the giant zero-pointer that is very close to them. Its shadow draped over them like a veil, as if this is some dramatic battle scene from an anime, even if this was just a boy who didn't know how to do sheet. But the zero-pointer is so close to crushing Uraraka, and what the F can he do? He can't move, but he has to help. He is going to become a hero, and if he can't Fing move he can't become a F hero, and he has TO move. Hitoshi sprinted towards Uraraka. That had anyone else seen it, they would have thought he had a speed quirk, or maybe he is just going to have really bad muscle cramps after this, and says, Uraraka, use your quirk on me. I'll find some way to get rid of the zero-pointer. Now. And she did. And Hitoshi has never felt this weightless in his life before. Or, well, he might have enjoyed it more had he not been weighed down by another huge set of problems that is Uraraka and the zero-pointer, so he willed himself to focus. And focus. And then he used the bow staff as leverage, just like how Midoriya taught him, and propelled himself upwards once more, only this time, he flew much higher. Hitoshi wants to pat himself on the back for his extraordinarily angled aim because he is flying straight towards the head of the robot then. So long for my limbs. Amen. And then, as he was a bow staff away from the robot's neck, he struck its control panel straight on that one nail that looked loose. And the robot froze, just like the last one, and promptly started crashing to the floor. Due to Hitoshi still being under the effects of Uraraka's quirk, he won't get fall damage. So he kept his hold on the robot and only let go at the last second to jump away from the rubble that was blown away by the impact of the robot hitting the ground. Hitoshi looked back at Uraraka, and realized that she was still trapped under the piece of rubble. Uraraka, I'm done. He promptly fell on his butt to the ground, again, as Present Mic's voice rung throughout the mock city site, signaling the end of the exam. So much for a cool anime fight moment. Hitoshi didn't waste another second before running to Uraraka once more, only to realize that she threw up. Sorry for being late, Hitoshi apologizes as he used his bow staff to flip the rubble above Uraraka away, freeing her. It's fine, Shinso. Uraraka says genuinely, though her expression was strained. She immediately threw up again, and Hitoshi thankfully stepped out of the way before it got onto his shoes. You were so cool up there. Man, I'm sorry you wasted your time because of me. Hitoshi wanted to console her, mainly because he knew about the rescue points, but then realized that it would be sabotaging himself. It's fine, Uraraka. I'm sure Yue wouldn't have let you die either way. It's what a hero does, right? Uraraka's eyes lit up as she stared up at Hitoshi. Shinso! You're so cool. I actually want to become a rescue hero because my quirk is more suited for situations like just now. And you're right. Saving people is a hero's job. Hitoshi blushed slightly at the mass of compliments. Thankfully, an old lady, recovery girl, the youthful heroine, Midoriya had told him, came to check up on their injuries. She doesn't look very youthful, Hitoshi had said to Midoriya when he showed him some photos of her. Maybe not to you, Midoriya had murmured. Hitoshi still didn't get what he meant, but oh well. Right now, he's more worried about any torn muscles and the suddenly aching bruises on places on his body he didn't even know existed. Midoriya, strangely, wasn't there when Hitoshi finished his exam and got out. He just brushes it off, because that's just typical Midoriya. This is why they are currently meeting up at a small cafe near Dagoba Beach. You didn't use your quirk? Midoriya asks in a strange voice after Hitoshi told him about what he did during the entrance exam. Hitoshi wants to lie, but Midoriya will probably know either way, no? There weren't too many people to brainwash, you know. Right, Midoriya says. Well, I have two pieces of news for you. Hitoshi blinks and puts his coffee down. The good news, Midoriya puts up a single finger dramatically, is that we both passed the hero course exam. No, do not ask me why I know that, you know exactly how I know that. And the bad news? Hitoshi says, slightly wary because whatever makes Midoriya feel bad cannot be good. Midoriya lifts up another finger. You are tied in first place with Kaken at 77 total points. But since you have a more spread out division of villain and rescue points, this places you at a more deserving first place, so to speak. Hitoshi didn't really react because he was short-circuiting. Or maybe he was so overloaded with joy and catharsis that he couldn't think. Or maybe he just thought of too many things at once that he didn't really have time to filter his word vomit, because the next thing that comes out of his mouth is, how the F, did you not place first? Midoriya blinked owlishly at him. Because I couldn't be bothered to. Hitoshi wants to seethe at the unfairness, at Midoriya's skill, and just generally at Midoriya. And also at how little FS Midoriya seemed to be able to give about almost just anything, really. Does this guy even really care about anything? I don't know, but that sounds rather rude to me, Midoriya remarks with a raised brow, and Hitoshi realizes that he spoke that out loud. Oops. I care about a lot of things, Hitoshi. You'll have to be more specific. For example, I care about how you're going to avoid dying for real on your first day at UA. What do you mean by that? Hitoshi says, and who the F is Kaken? Midoriya's lips twist into something not so much a smile than what an eye roll would look like without rolling one's eyes. Kaken is Bakugo Katsuki, the other highest scorer with 77 villain points and no rescue. You'll see your separate scores when you get your letter. And anyways, Kaken is extremely competitive and has a powerful, flashy quirk which he has had lots of training for, which means he can definitely and will kill you with it, so I won't dismiss his hard work. However, you were also trained by me. Too much information, Hitoshi says, but, yeah. I mean, thanks for helping me through this year. You didn't have to, and you're powerful enough on your own. And I got infected by your mumbling again. The look Midoriya gave him after that is more mirthful assessing than anything warm, Hitoshi thinks. I heard you saved Uraraka too, Midoriya says as he twiddled with the spoon in his cold, untouched coffee. That earned you 30 rescue points and Uraraka congratulations. So we're all in the same class? Hitoshi says, and what about you? Midoriya waved a lazy hand. Don't worry about me, I got in the same class as you guys. And you'll just have to see, don't you? Hitoshi thought back about Bakugo Katsuki, and what this could possibly mean. Who's Bakugo to you, anyways? No one important, Midoriya shrugs, just an old acquaintance. Nothing exciting. I guess that's my whole life, now. Hitoshi wants to say that Midoriya's life was anything but unexciting. But he didn't. The day Hitoshi received the letter from UA, he found out 3 things. What Eraserhead really looked like, and oh, God, he really did look like a FING hobo. And also he's going to be there, 1, as homeroom teacher. And what the F dash. Hitoshi did place first, with 32 villain points and 45 rescue points, which gives him a total of 77, along with Bakugo Katsuki who scored only villain points. And also, Uraraka got 5th place, with 66 points in total. And they were all in the same class. Is that 3 things? Midoriya placed 7th, with a total score of exactly 60 points, with exactly 30 villain points and rescue points. Which, wow, way to go with the jack-of-all-trades look. And there's that. Hitoshi felt so empty, weirdly, but also kind of too overwhelmed, and also too happy but also tired as F dash. Too much information. But also, wow, he got into UA. The hero course nonetheless. And first FING place. He wouldn't have accomplished any of this without Midoriya. The true question was, why was the boy even helping him when he has much better ways to spend his time? You looked like you needed help. Hitoshi snorted. So Midoriya liked to play hero? But why did Midoriya always seem like he was missing so many things? It was kind of sad sometimes. Every time he thought he understood Midoriya he has to revise it immediately because there was always something off with it. Even after spending 10 months with the shorter boy, he still could not figure him out. Well, baby steps. There are 2 weeks left before UA. 2 weeks left to hone his skills enough to match up to the others, or rather, their expectations. And hopefully not get kicked out and get Eraserhead's signature. Whichever comes first, of course. What, Shinso says, in the name of Jesus FINGF sheet. Holy FING sheet. Izuku says. They are currently standing at the gates of UA. The UA. Well, it really was a really big deal for Shinso. Izuku was unfazed, no reason to when he co-found the school, after all. But no one needed to know that. So like, Izuku drawls, Hitoshi, we should really go. Or I'm going to abandon you and you will be late. Alright, FING fine, Shinso says, jackass. Izuku snorts, but slows down to let Shinso catch up with him anyway. What comes after they reach the classroom, though, is not as eventful as they had imagined. Or, that was what Izuku would have liked to say, had things ever gone smoothly for him for once. Case in point, having Bakugo Katsuki in their class there before them, and even sitting in front of him. Apparently, Katsuki was just getting lectured by some blue-haired, tall guy. Wait, isn't that the boy from the entrance exam who told them off? Ah, never mind because he put his feet on the table. Well, that was just typical behavior for any Bakugo. The bad news was actually just him noticing Izuku and Shinso walking in then. As expected, Katsuki's eyes went dark and his expression morphed to that of inexplicable rage. Having dealt with his bloodline for decades upon decades, Izuku sighed and covered his ears. What the hell, you motherfucking a-hole? Katsuki screams as he blasted himself in front of Izuku and Shinso. The F you doing here? Who the hell is that eyebag scum behind you? Izuku turns his head to Shinso, only to sweat drop as the taller teen clutches the side of his head like a lifeline. Whoops, he forgot to warn Hitoshi and says, well, I passed the entrance exam, so I'm here. Isn't it just such a fate that we both ended up in the same classroom? Izuku says gleefully, leaning forward into Katsuki's personal space and making him take an involuntary step back. And this is Shinso Hitoshi, my beloved best friend. Shinso gagged silently from beside him. Well, at least he's recovered from the ear-splitting screams, so Izuku made sure to add more. And you know, Kaken, since I'm just such good friends with the both of us, my friend is your friend too. I'm sure that you and Hitoshi will get along so well. And now Shinso is seething behind him too, both taller teens radiating off a murderous aura towards Izuku. Without the younger two noticing, though, most of the class has already filled in by now and are watching the show go on. This happened to include Uraraka-san, who was probably too scared to say hi to Shinso, and Izuku, who was sandwiched between him and Katsuki. Izuku waved to her with a bright smile and shot her an okay sign. Hey, Izuku thought as he turned his attention back to the two fuming teens looming over him, maybe my riling techniques worked too well. And then, however, Izuku caught something yellow slithering towards the classroom door. The moment he stepped out to check on it, though, was coincidentally also the moment that Katsuki decided to launch a mid-sized explosion at where Izuku was supposed to be, and since Izuku was no longer there, the explosion was then aimed at Shinso. Whoops. Which would have been the case, had Katsuki's quirk not been erased at that moment. Wait, erased? Don't tell me. The yellow thing, which turned out to be a yellow sleeping bag, zipped open and fell down to reveal a very tired and haggard-appearing man with greasy, black hair and unkempt stubble. However, the most defining feature was the man's scarf-thin, gray stripes of a coarse material around his neck. This was Pro-Hero Eraserhead, otherwise known as Aizawa Shoyuta or, now, their homeroom teacher. His quirk was Erasure, which allowed him to temporarily disable a person's quirk by looking at them. This seemed to have been demonstrated on Katsuki as his quirk did not work, and that Aizawa's eyes glowed red upon activation. Looking up from his shock, Izuku smiled lightly. Maybe this was the ideal state of affairs, after all. Just what in the world, Aizawa drawls with narrowed eyes, hand on his scarf and looming over the two fighting teens, is going on? School has only started for 8 seconds. Shinso and Katsuki were visibly shocked at the sudden intrusion. Before the two could regain their composure, though, Aizawa turned to the rest of the class. My name is Aizawa Shoyuta, and I'll be your homeroom teacher for this year, he introduced himself as he took something out from his sleeping bag. First PRD starts now. Change into this gym uniform and gather outside. Quickly. So the day was going rather smoothly. This year's class wasn't as hopeless as last year's, and it seemed that Shoyuta didn't need to expel anyone as of now. There were only a few students who were visibly upset at the loss of the New Year's orientation, which he counts as a win. And then, he saw that kid. The short one with the messy hair, and Shoyuta thought it was weird because he strongly resembled someone he saw from before, but couldn't really place how. But there wasn't enough time to worry about trivial matters such as this when there was a much more urgent matter at hand. Shoyuta really didn't mean to do it, he didn't. Really. But he didn't expect this, whatever this is, and his student Midoriya Izuku was bleeding from, well, everywhere. You're not utilizing all your abilities, Shoyuta had said to Midoriya. It was obvious even if his quirk is self-healing, he doesn't seem that bothered by the physical strain at all. And then Shoyuta had activated his quirk on instinct, having done it hundreds of times to past students who wouldn't bother to use their full power and go beyond. He didn't know what went wrong this time, because this didn't go wrong, at least on students strong enough to get to the hero course. However, this seemed to be an outlier. Midoriya Izuku was an anomaly. The moment Shoyuta turned his eyes on him, it was as if everything just stopped and went white, except for the very boy himself. And there was something red flowing down the side of the head of the said boy, and his forehead, and his nostrils, and over the split lip of his mouth. Except his eyes. His eyes were blank, dangerously so, and the unseeing, faraway eyes of Midoriya Izuku stared back at him in this strange, just as blank limbo that they were in. There was nothing, and everything was blank, yet Shoyuta could hear and feel and see eyes larger than his own body staring back at him, even when his eyes were trained and unable to leave Midoriya Izuku. Something sinister was there, somewhere, someone. It was unsettling and it made the hair on the back of Shuta's neck stand up straight, but he couldn't move a single muscle. And yet, despite everything, Shoyuta couldn't move his eyes from the thin drop of blood red that slid down Midoriya's forehead, if it were moving at all, and it fell. Shoyuta blinks, involuntarily, and everything falls back into place. The only evidence that they'd ever been in that strange limbo of sorts was the tiny circle of red with tiny spikes protruding out from all angles. Of course, it was a drop of blood, even though when Shoyuta returned to himself, there was none of the stark red he had observed in that white world on Midoriya, and he was still spotless as ever, expression as blank as it could ever be. And then, Midoriya tilts his head ever so slightly, and Shoyuta realizes that he was in the middle of a lesson, god damn it, and promptly straightens up, not wanting to waste even more time looking like an absolute idiot in front of his new students. Midoriya. Yes, Eraserhead, sensei, said the boy with a slow and easy smile. Of course, he couldn't have known what happened, right? I'm just getting old and getting hallucinations, yeah, that's totally what happened, ahaha, a voice suspiciously like present mix blatantly sarcastic one says in his mind, and Shoyuta files the thought away for later, because what the hell even just happened? Wait, Eraserhead sensei? You're not, Shoyuta begins, before he realizes that he wouldn't win this, because Midoriya is obviously not like his other students, and he also feels a tinge of recognition whenever he looks at him. You know what, never mind. Shoyuta is thankful to see that this exchange hadn't gone on long enough to attract any other student's attention yet, because it would have been so mortifying if they had, and he would have lost all of his credit as a teacher. However, he soon realizes that there are much more important things to concentrate on now, as a teacher, when a softball, the one he used to test the students on throwing, fell in front of him, missing his face by only centimeters. "Sorry, Sensei," a pink-cheeked girl with brown hair apologizes to him profusely as she rushes to collect it, whom Shoyuta recognizes as Uraraka Ochako, the one with the gravity nullification quirk. I didn't mean to, it just floated off like that." Shoyuta takes a deep breath to stave off his frustration and internally massages his temples. He might have to expel a lot of problematic children this year. So like, Shinso says, what the hell was that? It was lunchtime, and the trio Shinso, Uraraka, and Izuku were eating at a table. Well, only Uraraka and Shinso, as Izuku had only gotten a cup of scalding black espresso from the coffee machine. He didn't really need to eat anyway. Uraraka had looked at him as if he were an alien when she found out that he wasn't going to eat the delicious and cheap school lunches from a variety of stalls. "So here's where all our taxes go," Uraraka had said glumly, yet still bought a meal and chomped it down despite that. "What?" Uraraka chimes in, "the ball. I forgot it was floating." "Oops. Not that," Shinso says, annoyed, "but you definitely did it on purpose." Kaken stomps towards one of the empty tables with his lunch, and Izuku leans out towards the aisle to wink at the blonde, earning himself an almost explosion to the face. Not like it would actually damage him, in any way, but it does bring up some concerns from the school board and student body if they saw them. "I meant Midoriya," Shinso continues on with his blabbing as he chews on his chicken udon noodles. "Ew," Izuku says, "don't speak while you eat, kid." "You say that as if you're not a kid," Ochako says. "Anchwar MWY question," Shinso says. "About?" "Like," Shinso swallows his mouthful of udon. "What were you and Sensei-san doing while you two faced off during the quirk test thing? It looked quite tense." Yeah, Uraraka says, even though Izuku's sure that she had no idea what was going on at all. But oh well. Izuku didn't really want to tell them exactly what happened, because this was the first time that it happened with his quirk, and he wanted to find out for himself first, before he told anyone else. "I fed his mother," Izuku says. Apparently this was what kids found funny these days, a meme, they called it. Izuku didn't really understand it, being the understandably old man that he is, but the reactions he got was more than worth it. "What?" Uraraka and Shinso say in unison. Izuku stands and walks towards the dumpsters as he finished his coffee, leaving the two other hero students in abject horror. The rest of the day is for classroom lessons. Boring. It seems that the hero course does not have PE lessons, and instead have hero training lessons and the textbook version of it as well. There wasn't much to do after school, since apparently their other teachers were kind enough to not give the class homework on the first day of school, so Izuku got the whole evening doing nothing, which, admittedly, is all that he ever did when he didn't have school, too. What did kids do after school again? Hanging out with other friends? Izuku had no use for that. Back when he was a bona fide preteen, when his mind still fit his appearances, he recalled going hiking well, from as much as he could remember, anyways. But wait. Kids these days like to play video games and laze around coffee shops in malls, right? Right. He should go back and change, and then get a fresh cup of coffee from Starbucks. And then go to a gaming supply store. That sounded terribly like the weekend plans of an American teenager who is regularly on RM14 anthesis deep. But maybe even an old man like him needs a break, too. And that is how Midoriya Izuku, more than 2 centuries old, found himself in front of a gaming store in Muzurafu District Mall, holding a cup of coffee. Izuku immediately realized that he hadn't thought this through when he received weird looks from the customers at his coffee, which Izuku wants to immediately chug and throw out, but resists the thought because he is a dignified 200-year-old. And then, he realized, too, that he had spaced out for too long, and bumped into another customer. Izuku raised his head. This 160 centimeters height, why am I always staring up at people? And Midoriya Izuku proceeded to look into the eyes of Shimura Tenko. Red, perhaps. Framed with crusted, yellow skin around his eyes, not a good sign, Izuku's head tells him, along with long, dirty, white-blue locks. It doesn't look like Tenko at all, and Izuku would be too presumptuous to call it a hunch, but there's something about the man in front of him that just tells him that it was Shimura Tenko, estranged and hero-loving grandson of Shimura Nana, the one whom Izuku abandoned as well. Izuku manages in half, before he's overcome with the overwhelming urge to throw what he drank of the coffee up. Which shouldn't make sense because Izuku didn't throw up, and his GG reflex was basically non-existent because whatever he choked on would never kill him, no matter how much Izuku wanted to, and he's spacing out again, haha. Watch out, bozo, Shimura Tenko says to him as he scans his coffee. He looks angry. Izuku notes like he had a grudge of some sorts to clear. However, the glint in his eyes tells him that Tenko was also gleeful, and not in the way that a child gets when he gets a toy. No, it was something else. Something more sinister? What the F are you doing with a coffee in a gaming shop, anyway? Why does everyone think that's weird? Izuku says, sniffing, with a thankfully normal and flat voice, not giving away the flurry of anxiety that Izuku was feeling then. He notes that Tenko's clothes are pitifully dirty and ragged. Maybe this was what teenagers like these days, except Tenko is already 20? 21? But Izuku supposes that it was still in the late teens area. And also, he noticed that Tenko apparently liked shooting action RPG games, from the section he was looking at just then. So Tenko is apparently into edgy stuff. Wasn't the Shimura family mysteriously killed a few years ago? If so, why was Tenko? You're in a gaming shop, Tenko says. Oh, right, oops, newsflash, thanks for the update. You seem like you would know your way around gaming shops, Tenko. Can you introduce me to some good games around here? Bad decision, bad decision. What the hell was he thinking? He shouldn't be this forward. Edge teenagers are supposed to be approached with care and like a cat, right? Is Tenko like a cat? The silence that hangs in between them is loud, even with the fluttering and chatters from the crowd in the gaming shop. No one seemed to notice Izuku and Tenko in the corner. Tenko's face was first shock, and the amusement, and then raw FING rage. What? Tenko breathes. Did you just call me? Oops. Wait, what? Shimura? Tenko? Oh, okay, maybe Izuku got the wrong person, but he couldn't have, not with how many times he's seen that face, perhaps not on the actual Tenko himself, but on his estranged and dead grandmother, Shimura Nana, hero, and someone whom Izuku had failed. So he couldn't have been wrong. So what was Tenko angry about? Given, edgy teenagers are angry about a lot of things. So Izuku decided to take the intimidation tactic. Where did you hear that name? Tenko seethes, his hands twitching at his side. He probably wants to grab Izuku by the cuff of his neck, but was perhaps too afraid to do so in a public area. Izuku did want to bring Tenko back instead of failing him like the other families of One for All holders as well, but he hadn't the slightest idea of what was going on. So he showed him a more subdued smile, wanting to appear as harmless as possible. Do you, not want to be called that? That seemed to bring Tenko back to reality, and he abruptly brought a hand up to scratch at his neck, though he was careful about not using all of his fingers, Izuku notes. Perhaps a 5-point activation quirk? He files the thought away for later. It's Shigaraki. Shigaraki Tamura. He seemed like he was holding back more anger, but Izuku didn't want to press on. Okay, Shigaraki-san. So like the games. Right, Tenko, no, Tamura sighed. He might have said something under his breath, what the hell was that stupid NPC, but Izuku let it go. Perhaps. Another day. Strictly speaking, Midoriya Izuku wasn't really sure what happened after that. Well, as far as alright went in his book, it went splendidly. Kids these days are so weird and antisocial. Izuku's phone lit up with a myriad of spam from Shinso, but it was probably nothing important. The next day, after sleeping through the general lessons at UA, Izuku found himself in his first hero training class. It was a bit peculiar, how the teachers didn't really seem to give half AF even when they noticed him, along with a few other incompetent kids in class, sleeping. All the better for him. However, Izuku knew that he had F'd up on the first day of school, unprecedentedly. He hadn't thought much about it after the incident with Aizawa, but now his rationality all comes back and he wants to slap himself. It was very careless to stand out and act conspicuously yesterday. Of course, it was permissible at Nabu, where there were few competent people who would mess with his plans or see through him. But he couldn't afford it here, at UA. Where Nezu was, where espionage blended into broad daylight, despite being a hero school. Not at all, no. And yet he's still F'd up. He has been doing this a lot lately, zoning out whenever and losing some of his rationality. Ever since he met Hitoshi and Katsuki. It was very weird indeed. He is losing touch. But that's fine. A plan formed in Midoriya's head as All Might burst into the classroom for the last class of the day for hero training. The rules were simple. Too simple, perhaps, for a FING hero school. Izuku mulled over what All Might explained once more as he stepped into training ground beta, only to discover he was the first. Well, it wasn't exactly surprising, seeing that he didn't actually need to change. He didn't have a hero costume, because it sounded silly when they asked for a formal SBMSN during the application PRD. So he just wrote school uniform on it. Izuku thought they would have penalized him, but what can they do about it? But, then again, Not having a costume would make him stand out. Different. At this point, the students filtered in quickly, so Izuku didn't think much about it anymore. Luckily, no one else really noticed him all that much, and they were all admiring each other's costumes. Shinso and Uraraka automatically walked over to Izuku, and judging by their raised eyebrows, Izuku knew they were going to ask about his costume. Izuku just shrugged. I didn't see the appeal in it. But having a real costume is so cool. Uraraka protested. However, she seemed to have grasped that it was a futile attempt by the blank look on Izuku's face. Uraraka's costume had a really distinct space theme, with the blobby bracelets, boots, and the helmet. Shinso's costume was very obviously inspired by Eraserhead to anyone that knew him, at least. It was a mostly black bodysuit with dark blue and periwinkle elements, attached pouches, plus a safety jacket and other accessories. To be honest, it made him look more like a spy than anything, but teens must think stuff like that is cool. Ah, this is really embarrassing, the bodysuit is really tight, Uraraka murmured. Shinso nudged her shoulder slightly. It does look good on you though. The tightness is probably intentional by the designers as it would help with the nausea that Uraraka's quirk induces, Izuku thinks. Though he doesn't say it out loud, and instead relocates his attention to All Might, who cleared his throat and fiddled with the large screen in front of the room. At the corner of his eyes, Izuku noticed Katsuki staring intently at him. I'm not doing anything wrong. Look away. For this exercise, they will be split into pairs and into larger groups of heroes and villains, and fight 2-on-2 indoor battles. It was really perfect for Izuku's niche, something like underhanded tactics and espionage work. But at the same time, he can't flaunt this ability too much, in order to keep a low profile. Of course, his plan mostly depends on which partner he gets for the activity, though he doesn't particularly care. If the teammate is useless, he can just do it himself, or lose. But it doesn't really matter, as long as he attracts as little attention as possible. I really need to stop obsessing over this attention stuff. The more I focus on it, the less space I have to think about everything else. If all they need to do is either incapacitate the opponent or take control over the bomb, then it should be easy enough to do. Then, All Might finally brought out a box for them to draw out their numbers from. It was random, as predicted, and Izuku reached his hands into the box to see that he was in Villain Team F. He was paired up with Todoroki Shudo, against Yaoyorozu Momo and Ishido Mina. It was a really good pairing, overall, because two of the class powerhouses were congested. Here, which meant that there was little chance that he would be expected to do anything in the face of Todoroki Shudo's flashy quirk. Nice. Good. Great. Shinso walked over to him. Todoroki, tough guy. Are you gonna show off? Izuku side-eyed him. Hitoshi was in a team with Uraraka, coincidentally, and they were facing off against Katsuki and Tenya. Actually, this is even better, because Katsuki would develop this rival complex with Hitoshi in no time, giving him little room to think about Izuku. Maybe, Izuku says monotonously. And thus it began. The first team was pretty insignificant, but they seemed to have put on a good fight nonetheless. The second round was Izuku and Todoroki's round, so after All Might and Yaoyorozu finished analyzing the fight, they headed off together to their building. Izuku snuck a glance at the youngest child of Todoroki Enji, and couldn't help but think that his hero costume looked like a fusion of pajamas and an ice cyborg. Though, he really shouldn't judge, seeing that he has no costume at all. So what's the game plan here? Izuku asked. Todoroki merely stared at him, though Izuku couldn't tell if he was just naturally angry or he had a problem with him. Just don't get in the way and you'll see. I wasn't planning to, anyway. But Yaoyorozu is a recommended student, like you are. I'm just so worried that she's going to beat us, you know. Todoroki stared at him as if judging how perfunctory that was. I said I have a plan. Izuku followed him up to the third floor, where the bomb was, and leaned on the wall as he watched Todoroki inspect the room. As the timer for their prep time approached 1 minute, Todoroki turned to Izuku. You might want to stay on your toes, if you don't want to be caught up in the ice. Izuku smiled. Of course, this was Todoroki's plan. A boy so accustomed to working alone and efficiently due to his strong quirk. He swiftly exited the room and went to the rooftop. After all, there was no use for him in the building anymore. Shinso frowned as he watched Midoriya sit leisurely at the top of the rooftop, as if waiting for something to happen. It was unlike Midoriya, but also befitting, he supposed. Egoistical and sure of his abilities, yet constantly hiding behind others to conceal his talents. It was a strange combination, for sure, but usually Midoriya would try to handle the situation on his own, or have other plans while he waited for his partner to finish up. However, it didn't seem to be the case this time. Granted, Todoroki wasn't a regular partner either, he was a pretty DMN proficient guy himself. His ice-cold eyes and resting beach face stopped anyone from trying to talk to him other than Yaoyorozu, not unlike Hitoshi himself, though. But it just wasn't the same type as Midoriya. It was hard to put it into words, and Hitoshi himself wasn't really sure as to why being around Midoriya was so nerve-wracking. Oh well, that's probably for another time. Right now, it seems that the hero team was finally ready to enter the building, and Hitoshi didn't want to miss out on the fun. Yaoyorozu checked her pocket for all the materials that she needed. Great. Of course, she would not fail to create a plan. However, in the face of Todoroki's Shudo, it would be hard to win against him, even with a careful strategy. Not that Momo really knew Todoroki that well, either. In the little pockets of time that she had to interact with the dual quirk user, it became obvious that he preferred to use ice over his fire side, for unknown reasons. Perhaps it was harder to master than the ice side? Who knew? Though, it would be useless to think about that now. Todoroki's quirk was strong enough to not need a too complicated plan, he just needed to freeze his opponents until they gave up. Ashido's quirk was a bit of a horrible match against Todoroki, as her acid does not react with ice, and although her quirk would be of great help if she could get to Todoroki in person, that didn't seem to be very easy. So that's where Momo comes into play. She knew that the first plan Todoroki would do would be to freeze the whole place to the very last corner, though she doubted that Todoroki would underestimate her after their history, so she created an extensive plan, 2 fire throwers and other various heat-producing tools for her and Ashido. But then again, there was of course Midoriya Izuku, whom Momo was admittedly curious about. The boy didn't show any signs of particular strength, and the scene with Aizawa-sensei at the quirk apprehension test was curious, but other than that and Midoriya's every stony face, there really was nothing out of place with the boy. However, Momo couldn't underestimate him. She didn't know his quirk yet, and him not displaying any flashy strong ones at the quirk apprehension test didn't help. However, she wanted to trust in her plans, despite the unknown piece of the puzzle that was Midoriya Izuku. Alright, Ashido-san, Momo smiled encouragingly at her partner, let's go in. As expected, the moment the test started, ice swallowed the building, turning it into an impenetrable castle of pure coldness. Momo smirked, then looked to Ashido, who nodded at her as they both turned up their fire throwers. The entrance was easy enough to break through, though more and more ice blocked their way the further up they went. It was surprisingly easy to get through the blocks of ice, though it was probably difficult for even Todoroki to pinpoint the exact thickness and location of every sheet of ice that he creates, anyways. Now that they were in the second layer, it was only a matter of staying quiet and looking for the location of the bomb. They were currently in a small corner and replenishing their fire throwers. It can only be the 3rd or 4th floor, or the rooftop, but I doubt it, Ashido says to Momo. Momo nods. Todoroki is the most dangerous when they fight face to face. Momo did have enough storage to produce maybe 4 more cartridges for the fire thrower, but they did have all the other materials they may need already, so she was pretty confident it will work out as long as they can catch Todoroki off guard. If they can, is the most vital part. And it was just becoming more and more suspicious that Midoriya has yet to play a role in this fight. Seeing Todoroki's attitude towards cooperation, it was entirely plausible that Midoriya just didn't want to deal with him and split up, so they needed to beware of him as well, With the last confirmation, they sneaked up onto the 3rd floor. Before they entered the center room, though, Momo took out her temperature detector and started scanning. Why didn't you just do this beforehand? Ashido whispered. It wouldn't have been too far away, with all the ice blocking us. Momo said apologetically, I'll tell you earlier next time. She looked back to her heat detector, and lo and behold, Todoroki was of course in the center of the main room, with what was presumable the bomb, frozen to the spot. With Midoriya nowhere to be seen. Which was very strange. But Ashido seemed to be filled with pent-up energy waiting for be let out in a fight, so Momo decided to take the risk this time. I didn't expect Yaoyorozu-san to be so careful and careless at the same time, Ochiko says to Shinso, it's as if she's entirely forgetting Midoriya's existence. I guess so, Shinso says, rubbing the back of his neck, but it's not like Midoriya's doing anything either. But why? Ochiko ponders. You and Midoriya seem to be really good friends. Do you know something? Shinso looked mildly annoyed at this point. Probably because of Todoroki, I guess. That guy is too strong, so maybe he asked Midoriya to stay back. That may be right. However, Ochiko couldn't help but feel that something may be off here. In the short time she got to know Midoriya, the more he seemed like a complete enigma to her. But it's fine, she thought as she turned her head back to the match. It's probably nothing. Meanwhile, Momo got ready to ambush Todoroki with the fake bomb. Even though they had everything they needed, she still felt very nervous to be fighting against Todoroki. His quirk can encase them in a matter of seconds, and they only had about 5 minutes left to acquire the bomb. Alright, Momo says to Ashido, let's go in and just go with what we discussed earlier. Ashido nods, and they sprang from their hiding position from behind the wall into the icy room. Todoroki immediately jerked his head up to look at them from where he leaned against the bomb, and he brought his arm up, presumably to throw a wave of ice towards the two girls. Momo noticed at this moment that his right arm was covered in a layer of thin frost, meaning that his stamina is limited. What a vulnerability. Momo ducked and used her flamethrower just in time to avoid the large spike of ice that was sent her way. Ashido, apparently, was able to dodge as well. In regular situations, Todoroki's aim would be way better, but it was becoming increasingly obvious that Todoroki was running out of energy. The bomb was entirely encased in ice, at this point. Momo internally bristled at that. Since they wouldn't have time to find Midoriya after fighting Todoroki, they would have to thaw it out manually later to claim it. Despite that, Momo smirked. Overall things were going really well for them so far. She had enough ignition fuel left, so they really only needed a minute or so to tire Todoroki out, less time to put him out of the playing field and even less time to secure the bomb. Todoroki keeps throwing ice out, and it did almost catch Ashido once, but Momo could see the ice on his arm getting firmer and firmer. The expression on his face was twisted into anger and frustration. You really should have seen this coming, Todoroki-kun. 3 minutes left. The ice keeps spreading. So, Todoroki, Momo pants, in the intervals between the ice waves that got longer as the ice waves came smaller, where's Midoriya? Let's hurry up and get this over with, huh? Todoroki stiffened, even with all that ice on him, and his next attack was completely off-kilter. I will deal with the both of you on my own accord. Or will you? 2 minutes left. Ashido runs out of Todoroki's peripheral but closer to him than ever, and Momo knew what she needed to do. Distract him. Or can you? Momo asks. Normally she would not talk like this, but with the adrenaline of the battle raging inside her veins, he couldn't help but put on a sneer as she threw a blast of flames towards Todoroki. He keeps getting weaker and weaker. Is this what hyper-independence does to someone? 1 minute left. Midoriya is nowhere to be seen. And then, in that moment, Ashido was at the perfect distance and angle, and she swung a powerful kick to Todoroki's frozen-over left side, coupled with a splash of soft acid, of course. The kick knocked the youngest Todoroki to the ground, and Momo half-flinched upon hearing the thud from Todoroki's fall onto the thick ice. Momo discarded her flamethrower on the ice-covered ground to run to Ashido, and help capture Todoroki. 30 seconds left. Before Todoroki could even attempt to get up, Ashido delivered a swift cut to the back of his neck. 20 seconds left. Although it was not such a precise one, paired with his exhaustion, Ashido was able to knock Todoroki out cold. Momo snapped the HNDCFFS on Todoroki's limp hands, and looked back to the bomb, preparing to defrost and claim it. Just in time to see Midoriya, leaning against a seemingly empty chunk of ice, flamethrower in hand, and the bomb nowhere to be seen. What? What? No, this was impossible. All their plans down in the drain, when they were in the last moments of their battle, when they were just about to win. 10 seconds left. How did he get to the bomb? Momo whispered, shaking as she tried to get up and attempt to capture Midoriya. Ashido seemed to be dumbstruck too, as she wobbled involuntarily due to the adrenaline ceasing in her bloodstream. Momo ran forward, as fast as she could. 5 seconds left. How? Midoriya looked so far away. So unreachable. He was a lot shorter than Momo, but from here, he seemed to loom over them. She ran. And ran. Time's up! All Might shouted into the microphone, but his voice boomed throughout the surveillance room. Shinso looked at one of the camera feeds, zoomed in on Midoriya's face, expressionless, no signs of nuances nor the joy post-victory. There was only a neutral coolness to it. What did I expect? It's Midoriya, after all. Achiko cheered beside him. Good job, Midoriya-kun. However, the rest of the class seemed to be mostly shocked at the sudden change in direction of the battle. It had been obvious that, despite Todoroki's godlike quirk, his non-existent strategy was his downfall and that Yaoyorozu and Ashido were bound to win. But Midoriya turned the game at the last seconds, literally. No one had expected Midoriya to butt in. He seemed like a pretty neutral guy, to be honest. And his method was, admittedly, quite ingenious. Truth be told, I kind of wanted to see Yaoyorozu-chan and Ashido-chan win. Hagakure sighed. But you've got to admit, Midoriya pulled a great save, back there. Mido what? Come on, Todoroki probably told him to do that early on. That dude is insane, brain-wise and brawn-wise. Shinso furrowed his brows. Although he liked to think he knew Midoriya, he wasn't really sure of what really happened and whether he wanted to win of his own accord, and not out of sympathy for the Todoroki. Maybe he could ask him later? Speak of the devil. Achiko says as she pointed to the door, where Midoriya came in. Wait, did he say his thoughts out loud again? God, he really needs to stop doing that. Hitoshi turned his head towards his green-haired peer. And Midoriya? Why aren't you with the others? Midoriya raised an eyebrow, but it was difficult to tell what his expression was due to the poor lighting. Straight to the point, are we? Well, Todoroki passed out, as you saw, and the 2 others are half frozen to death. And they told me to return by myself when Recovery Girl came to fetch them. Achiko nodded. Well, I hope they'll be okay, but, other than that, you did seriously amazing out there. At this point, a small crowd had gathered around the returnee, looking curious about what really happened back there. Well, not really. Todoroki asked me to do it, before the match in case anything happens, Midoriya says monotonously. Todoroki is really amazing, you know, there's no way I can take credit for that. The people around them seemed to dim momentarily upon hearing that it really wasn't all that exciting underdog saves the day thing, and they retracted back to their positions. But Hitoshi knew better. However, it was him and his team that had to go up against Bakugo next immediately, so he filed the questions for later and concentrated on forming a plan in his head. Izuku stayed at the back of the surveillance room, and stared into the screens displaying Hitoshi's team facing off against Bakugo's, which would only be loosely classified as a team battle by now, because it really was only Katsuki and Hitoshi having a one-on-one fight. The vendetta they managed to develop against each other in just a couple of days was quite astounding, really. But it allowed for Hitoshi to be occupied with someone other than himself, for one. And it was entertaining. Hitoshi's plan was apparently quite simple, but rather ingenious. Izuku remembers telling him about one of Katsuki's weak spots before. Hitoshi easily predicted that Bakugo would never willingly cooperate with Ida Tenya, and would probably go search for them on his own and leaving Ida to guard the bomb himself. Which meant that all they really needed to do was to hide from Bakugo's relentless and angry patrolling and go straight to the bomb. Which, actually isn't as easy as Izuku's making it out to be because he is well experienced in being inconspicuous, and while Hitoshi learnt a lot from him, it was little compared to Izuku. And Katsuki is indeed a very perceptive child, despite him appearing hot-headed and temperamental. However, this will be nulled significantly due to the fact that Bakugo's tunnel vision is nothing to brush off either. Once he feels that his pride has been hurt, he will stop at no means to destroy the person that wounded his ego. And Hitoshi, apparently, is becoming more and more like that person. Best of luck, Hitoshi, Izuku thought as Shinso narrowly escaped the piercing gaze of a very explosive blonde individual. Hitoshi thanked the gods, even though he should be thanking Midoriya for the tip really, but Midoriya is as close and as good of a god as one can get anyway, for the fact that he got out of the battle relatively unscathed. His sloppily concocted plan had worked. Somewhat. The moment they discovered the rubble from when Bakugo started blowing the building's pillars up out of anger, Hitoshi became confident that his plan would work. He had asked Uraraka to collect those to use against Ida when they get to the bomb later, and they split ways then so as to avoid as much member damage as possible if they were to be discovered by Bakugo. And holy F-, Bakugo is a positive savage in battle. But at last, he had narrowly and barely avoided the explosive classmate and sneaked up to where Ida hid the bomb. Poor choice of location, really, 4th floor central room? You just have to be so conspicuous, huh? And met up with Uraraka. And then, all it took for them to secure the bomb was to distract Ida despite his speed, trap him as much as they could with the rubble, and make Hitoshi touch the bomb, Ida a mere few centimeters away from grabbing him when he did. Wow! Thank God for Midoriya's teachings. Thank God for Uraraka's quirk. Thank God for Bakugo's deathly temperament. Actually, no, because he's just going to fight him later. They had won. The rest of the hero training session went by without much drama, thankfully, and they were even a few more minutes on schedule. As everybody started packing and change into regular uniforms, All Might approached Izuku. Midoriya Shounen, he says, would you like to visit Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and Ashido in the infirmary? I need to talk to your whole team about your performance. It was quite spectacular. Izuku noticed Hitoshi perking up at that, no doubt wanting to question Izuku himself, too, and nodded. Hitoshi came over and placed an elbow on Midoriya's shorter shoulders, no doubt to put on the act of a concerned friend. Nah, sensei, Hitoshi says, mind me tagging along? At All Might's hesitant approval, they went to the infirmary together. When they got there, though, it seemed that Todoroki was still sleeping and resting after quirk overuse, so they could only talk to the 2 girls. All Might started a speech about how great they've performed and fought during the mock battle. Izuku didn't miss how Yaoyorozu had looked more or less shocked and apprehensive upon seeing Izuku here, too. After all might was done, he left the students on their own. Which is to say, he left 3 people to question Izuku. Midoriya-san, Yaoyorozu started, after a long silence, but looked to be collecting her words carefully. What happened back there? How did you make the bomb? Hitoshi and Ashido looked interested in that too. Izuku can lead Yaoyorozu and Ashido on for a bit, and he was sure Hitoshi was just here to gauge his responses. Oh, Izuku simply says, I just dumped the diesel fuel from your flamethrower onto the ice. I figured that the dimethyl diesel would at least cause the ice to explode and cover up your sights or whatever. But it didn't happen. I guess it just froze on the surface of the ice and made it opaque. The lights were very dim, so you guys probably just didn't see it well, haha. Yaoyorozu and Ashido looked surprised, but also understandably disappointed. Todoroki-kun told me to stay put unless something happened and said you might use flamethrowers, so, yeah, he finished off lamely. They probably expected some strong quirk from the cryptic display in the last few seconds of the battle, and it wasn't wise to keep them thinking that. Hitoshi, unsurprisingly, looked unimpressed. Probably disappointed at the act that Izuku really didn't pull some sick stunt, but maybe also that his admission wasn't really all that exciting. Or told him anything new about Izuku that he didn't know, anyway. In any case, his job was done here. He had successfully pushed through his first official hero training lesson, and it was interesting, for sure. Izuku turned back to the bedridden patients. If there's nothing else, I'll go back home, then. It's getting pretty late. See you tomorrow? Ashido smiled brightly at them and waved. Let's go, Hitoshi. Izuku jerked his head towards the doorway, and they left. All in all, that was a pretty good confrontation, everything considered. It's not like Yaoyorozu will suddenly get the guts to ask Todoroki what really happened, and he doubts she thinks him impossible of such feats either. As long as he can keep up this cover within this school, this city, he would be fine. He was just afraid that he would, once again, forget his goal in its pursuit, not unlike his first student.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.